owner of the US Mega Farm. Este video es puramente para entretenimiento y no infringe derechos de autor en los derechos de la novela y la imagen son del autor original, no reclamamos propiedad. No te gusta esperar y quieres escuchar este fanfic completo ahora? Suscríbete a nuestro Patreon, donde encontrarás los mejores fanfics. Chapter 576 Beef is back. After breakfast, Kinzu led the bouncing Shirley out of the villa. Under the porch, the white tiger was biting a large piece of beef with great enjoyment. The two little tiger cubs squatted beside their father, looking at him with envy. The two little guys kept slandering their father for eating alone, but there was nothing they could do, because they couldn't beat him. Kinzu looked at the two little tiger cubs, and then looked at Daha and Xiaohe, who were looking forward to the food distribution, and couldn't help frowning. How come the sitting posture looks more and more like Daha brothers? Uncle, hurry up. The little girl held her pony to prevent it from running around, and pulled Kinzu with one hand, trying hard to make him walk faster. Kinzu shook his head and quickened his pace, but said, "Little girl, you can't do this, you can't be led by the horse, you have to lead it." The little girl thought about it, and it seemed that what the uncle said made sense. But looking at the excited pony in front of him, he sighed helplessly and said depressedly, "I can't stop it." Kinzu almost couldn't help laughing at the sad little look. When he arrived at the stable, Kinzu had just let Xiaobao out when he was disturbed by a mobile phone ring. He took out his mobile phone and saw that it was just as expected. Who else could it be except Chen Mu? After answering the phone, Kinzu asked helplessly, "Brother Chen, what's wrong so early in the morning?" Chen Mu looked at the big sun outside the window, and then looked at the bustling crowd downstairs, and the corners of his mouth twitched a few times. "Boss, I want to ask when we can release the bluefin tuna. The guests are already waiting impatiently." Kinzu heard this, touched his nose, and said, "Didn't I tell you about these issues? You can do whatever you want." "Well, okay, then I will release the news today." Chen Mu asked a little depressed. Kinzu nodded, agreed, and said, "Well, you can handle these things. I still say that you are responsible for the operation of the restaurant." Chen Mu curled his lips. He just listened to this. If I really did this, I would probably be the first to leave. Just as he was about to hang up the phone, Chen Mu suddenly remembered something and asked, "Boss, the ranch suffered a lot of losses this time. Are there any losses in cattle and sheep?" When talking about this, Kinzu scratched his head and said depressedly, "Don't mention it. More than 2,000 cattle and sheep were lost. They have been taken to the slaughterhouse. I don't know how to deal with so much beef." What Kinzu said was true. No matter which country, the handling of dead cattle is very cautious. It's okay for accidental deaths like this. If it's those cattle that die normally, you won't even have the opportunity to slaughter them. They will be buried on the spot. Although cattle that died accidentally are better, if you want to put them on the shelves for sale, it also requires a very cumbersome procedure and they have to be sent to various departments for inspection. Thinking of the long list of processes that old John talked about yesterday, Kinzu felt a headache. Chen Mu on the other end of the phone smiled and said, "Boss, don't worry about this. Have you forgotten what we do? Just bring the commercial grade beef over here." Kinzu was stunned and asked uncertainly, "Is this okay?" Chen Mu smiled and asked back, "Why not? But don't you want top grade beef?" Kinzu felt a little guilty. He was not sure what quality the beef he raised was. Who said it's all top grade? So much beef is consumed every day, where does so much top grade quality come from? Chen Mu shrugged. What he said was true. Not to mention the entire United States, just Boston, how much top grade beef do so many Western restaurants consume every day? And how much top grade beef is produced? Not to mention those chain supermarkets and large stores, which have to take a large half of the share. How much beef can really fall into the hands of their Western restaurants? So the beef used in these Western restaurants is mostly free-range beef, and it's good that they don't use fattened beef. After a lot of talking, Kinzu finally understood. Wow, emotional shady things are everywhere. He thought that the steaks in Western restaurants that cost hundreds or thousands of dollars were really made of top-quality beef. Chen Mu smiled and explained, top-quality beef does exist, but it's only for those expensive steaks. For ordinary steaks, commercial beef is enough. Okay, then you can just send a car to pick it up. Kinzu nodded, feeling relieved, but also a little worried and asked, "But these are all dead cows, is that okay?" Chen Mu said indifferently, "No problem, there's no inspection here, and after cooking, who can taste the difference except for real gourmets?" Qin Zhu finally felt relieved. After hanging up the phone, he got on his horse and waved his hand with high spirits. "Let's go." After taking the little girl for a stroll around the ranch, Qin Zhu returned to the villa. Of course, it was impossible to really take the little girl around the ranch, it was just a stroll forward. With the foal's 4 short legs, if it was really taken around the ranch, it would probably take a whole day. Not long after returning to the villa, a car horn sounded at the door. When Qin Zhu came out and saw it, he was stunned. A long row of refrigerated trucks stretched from the door of the villa to the ranch. Old John got out of the car and walked over, shouting excitedly, "Boss, come and see, our beef is simply amazing, really amazing." Qin Zhu swallowed his saliva, pointed to the long row of refrigerated trucks in front of him, and asked with a dry throat, These are all?" Old John waved his hand nonchalantly, "Of course, more than 1,000 cows, that's hundreds of tons of beef." Qin Zhu couldn't say anything after hearing this. The feeling of listening to a string of numbers reported is still very different from the feeling of facing the real thing. Qin Zhu had been listening to Old John saying that more than 1,000 cows were lost, but he didn't really have much idea. But when he saw the endless frozen trucks, he was shocked beyond words. Of course, he was also heartbroken. "Boss, our cows are simply amazing. Not only is the meat yield high, but the quality of the meat is also very good." Old John didn't understand Qin Zhu's shock. After coming to Qin Zhu, he waved his hands excitedly. "Oh?" Qin Zhu came back to his senses, looked at the excited white old man next to him, and asked, "How high is the meat yield? Does the beef have marble? Thank you for the reward from Flying Eagle, I am touched." Chapter 577 High Quality Beef, Boss. "It's simply amazing." Old John pulled Qin Zhu to a refrigerated truck, opened the door and introduced, "Boss, our cattle have not yet reached the mark for slaughter, so the average weight is only about 500 kilograms, but the meat yield reaches 400 kilograms, a full 80% meat yield." Qin Zhu was a little surprised when he heard it. He had a rough understanding of the meat yield of beef, which was basically around 60 to 70%. It was really a miracle to reach 80%. "Boss, the most important thing is not the meat yield." Old John pointed to the pile of divided beef in front of him and said excitedly, "The key is the quality of our beef, which is really good. Not only the brisket and chest have reached the preferred level, but also the shoulder, top brain, rump and sirloin have reached the special level. Moreover, a large part of the arm tenderloin have dense marble patterns, reaching the premium level. We weighed it, and a total of 400 kilograms of beef reached the premium level, which is nearly 100 kilograms. Qin Zhu was a little dumbfounded. No way. So much. As a manor owner, he also knew a little about the market of beef. Now the meat yield of the whole cow is generally around 60%. And among the 60% of beef, if 20% can reach the premium level, it can be considered a good cow, at least the rancher will make a lot of money. Because according to the market price, the average price of premium beef in the United States is about $380 per kilogram, the premium is $120, and the premium is $60. The weight of an adult cow is usually around 800 kilograms. Even if the meat yield is 60%, it can produce about 480 kilograms of beef. Even if the premium grade is only 20%, it is still more than 100 kilograms. If you calculate it this way, a cow with a perfect meat yield can sell for several $1,000s just for the premium grade beef. Adding other beef, a cow can sell for at least $10,000 or $20,000. And what about Qin Zhu's? A 500 kilogram cow produced more than 400 kilograms of beef. The premium grade beef is more than 100 kilograms. What does this mean? It means that this cow, just the premium grade beef, can sell for $20,000 to $30,000. Adding other beef and some miscellaneous materials, the price of a cow can be sold for $30,000 to $40,000. Qin Zhu scratched his head. He remembered that the price he paid for a calf was only about $1,000, right? Even if you add labor, feed, and other miscellaneous expenses, about $2,000 would be enough. If you calculate it this way, the net profit of a cow is about $30,000. And if you raise 10,000 cows a year, how much money is that? Qin Zhu was a little confused. When did raising cattle make so much money? Boss. Old John's voice woke Qin Zhu up from his shock, and he asked blankly, "Old John, what's wrong?" The corners of Old John's mouth twitched. It seemed that he had been talking for a long time, but it was all talking to a cow. But who made him the boss? Old John had to repeat the question again in frustration. What should we do with all this beef now? The ranch will definitely not be able to store it. Kinzu was a little confused when he heard this. If so much beef went bad, wouldn't he be heartbroken? After thinking for a while, he took out his mobile phone and called Chenmu. After the call was connected, Kinzu told Chenmu about the matter and he said with a smile, "Boss, let them come directly to Boston. The warehouse I rent is vacant." Kinzu breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "Then it's settled. You know what, the quality of the beef this time is really good." "Oh?" Chenmu asked curiously. "How much is the preferred one?" "A 500-kilogram cow, guess how much?" Kinzu raised his eyebrows. Chenmu was silent for a long time, and then he said uncertainly, 60 kilograms. Kinzu laughed loudly and said proudly, "Wrong, I have 120 kilograms, and the premium ones alone are 100 kilograms. Plop. Chenmu's hand trembled, and the documents beside him fell to the ground, and he shouted in disbelief, "Boss, are you kidding? How can there be so many?" Kinzu smiled proudly, "Of course I'm not kidding you, you'll know when it is delivered." After hanging up the phone, Kinzu looked at the long line of refrigerated trucks in front of him and asked, "Old John, are the different grades separated?" Old John nodded, "Of course, boss, that's for sure." "Okay, then you can send the commercial beef to Chenmu, and just look for him when you get there." After Kinzu gave the order, he turned and went into the villa, called out the female bodyguards, and prepared to unload the goods. When Kinzu came out, the cowboys and fishermen also rushed over after hearing the news. Old John pointed to the more than 10 semi-trailer refrigerated trucks that were assigned and said to Kinzu, "Boss, these are commercial beef, and the ones over there are usable." Kinzu looked over and was a little surprised. Could his warehouse hold so much? Old John looked at Kinzu and suggested, "Boss, you should go to Revere to rent a few warehouses first. The ranch will definitely not be able to hold them." Kinzu nodded, "Okay, I see, let's fill up the ranch's warehouse first." After Old John took the other refrigerated trucks to Boston, Kinzu also got busy. Of the 400 kilograms of meat from a cow, commercial and above accounted for nearly 300 kilograms, which means that a cow only weighs less than 100 kilograms, which is commercial and usable level. This ratio is terrifying. And more than 1,000, nearly 2,000 cows, commercial and usable beef, reached a terrifying nearly 100,000 kilograms, that is, more than 100 tons of beef. No matter how big the warehouse of Kinzu's ranch is, it is impossible to accommodate it. But after moving a refrigerated truck empty, Kinzu was dumbfounded. "Damn, it's full already." Looking at the remaining 10 or so cars depressed, Kinzu quickly told Ryan next to him, "Go to the town and see if there are any cold storages for rent. Rent a few." Ryan also knew that the situation was urgent, so he didn't say much and drove towards Revere. Fortunately, these drivers were contacted by the slaughterhouse, and they didn't want to offend such a big rancher. Although it took some time, no one said anything. Instead, they were very easy to talk to, asking Kinzu not to worry. Kinzu was so touched. He thought that Americans were of high quality and would not complain even after such a long delay. But when it came to paying the bill later, Kinzu was a little dumbfounded. It turned out that they charged on time. Chapter 578 Renting a Cold Storage. Fortunately, Kinzu was lucky. Half an hour later, Ryan called back to report, "Boss, there is a small cold storage for rent now, with a capacity of about 1,000 tons. Kinzu was overjoyed when he heard this. Isn't this just right? Just when he wanted Ryan to rent it quickly, he heard this guy hesitate and said, "However, the other party does not accept short-term rentals, and requires a minimum of 1 year. Kinzu's words were stuck in his throat. "Rent for a year? Why would you rent such a large cold storage for such a long time?" But after only 2 seconds of hesitation, Kinzu made up his mind. Rent. Damn, there is no way not to rent it. In this small place, it is good to have an empty cold storage. He doesn't expect there will be anything else waiting for him. Besides, it's just money. How much does it cost to rent a cold storage? After Ryan went over to handle the formalities with the other party, Kinzu drove the convoy to Revere. The location of the cold storage is not far from the ranch, located in the suburbs of Revere. After arriving at the door, Kinzu also saw the owner of the cold storage, a middle-aged white man in his 40s with a beer belly. "Hi, Clean, nice to meet you. Kinzu was a little stunned by the other party's enthusiasm when they met for the first time. After a warm hug with this guy, Kinzu smiled awkwardly and asked, "What is this gentleman's name?" The middle-aged fat white man laughed and introduced himself. "Clean, you can just call me Chris. Come on, let's go and see the situation of the cold storage." Kinzu shrugged and had to follow him into the cold storage with a few people. According to Chris' introduction, the cold storage covers an area of about 1,200 square meters, with a capacity of more than 6,000 cubic meters, and is equipped with a quick freezing truck and a low-temperature storage. Kinzu took a general look, nodded with satisfaction, and said with a smile, "Mr. Chris, in this case, let's sign the contract." Chris heard this and nodded happily. He had just vacated this cold storage, and he didn't expect that it could be rented out again so soon. After the two came out, they went to a law firm in Revere and formally signed a lease contract. When the fat middle-aged white man left with the rent contentedly, Kinzu cursed fiercely. What a shady guy. For a year's rent, plus the deposit, this guy actually asked him for $100,000. In other words, the monthly rent is nearly $6,000. And how much does it cost to build a cold storage? Kinzu checked online and found that it was only about $300,000. Damn, if I had known earlier, I would have built one on the ranch. After cursing in frustration, Kinzu called everyone and started to move things into the cold storage. More than a dozen people, plus the assistance of various engineering machinery, still worked for more than 3 hours before everything was put in place. When it came time to settle the freight with the driver, Kinzu wanted to vomit blood even more. Damn, is it necessary to be so shady? After a busy morning, when Kinzu returned to the villa, he lay on the sofa and didn't want to get up. Fortunately, Eva had already prepared lunch, and everyone went to rest after eating. On the second floor, on the balcony, there were not many flowers in the garden that were blooming. Kinzu lay on the recline, enjoying the cool autumn breeze and yawning comfortably. After finishing his work in the morning, Kinzu received a call from Chain Mu. Hearing his excited voice, Kinzu was very proud. After all, this was the first output of his ranch. However, thinking of the question Chain Mu raised in the morning, Kinzu frowned slightly. Picking up the teacup and taking a sip, Kinzu fell into deep thought. Just as Chain Mu said, more than 300 tons of beef were indeed too much. Chain Mu said that even if the restaurant used it until next year, it was estimated that it would not be used up. But in this case, what about the cattle on his ranch? This is only more than 1,000 cattle. By next year, his ranch can still sell 6,000 to 7,000 cattle. What should he do then? Sell it to those meat companies? Kinzu said that he didn't want to do this. Self-production and self-sale seemed to maximize profits. Selling to others would always result in unsatisfactory prices. For example, this time, Chain Mu calculated the cost according to the market price. Anyway, even if this is the case, their restaurant will make a lot of money. Nearly 400 tons of beef, of which more than 100 tons are premium grade. According to the average market price of $380 per kilogram, that is more than $40 million. As for the rest, the lowest is also standard grade. At about $20 per kilogram, it can also sell for more than $10 million. Just more than 1,000 cows, sold for a full $50 million. This price is something other ranchers dare not even think about. Of course, Chain Mu also said that the restaurant is currently having difficulties with liquidity, so the money will be owed first. Even so, Kinzu, who has tasted the sweetness, will not consider selling beef to those beef dealers. Taking a sip of strong tea and watching haha and paint flying freely in the sky, Kinzu suddenly thought of his sister in China. Is her restaurant about to open? He took out his mobile phone and was about to call her, but Kinzu stopped and looked at the time. It was only a little after 3 in the afternoon. If he called her now, would he be torn to pieces by his sister? Shrugging his shoulders, Kinzu had to put the phone back. At night, Kinzu called Eva into the room and tossed her around for nearly an hour before letting her go. Thanks to that, the little girl now occupies a small room next door and no longer sleeps with Kinzu. Otherwise, Kinzu still needs to do things secretly. After Eva went back, Kinzu took out his phone and sent a video to his sister directly. The video was connected after just 2 rings. The screen shook for a while, and it stabilized only when Kinzu was almost dizzy. Uncle, when will you come back? 2 chattering children's voices sounded at the same time, making Kinzu's ears buzz. Kinzu quickly turned down the volume of his cell phone, then he looked at the two noisy little guys with a smile on his face. Uncle will be back soon. Tongton and Lily are at home. Are you listening to your mother? Lily is a boy after all, and he squeezed to the front. His little face was almost stuck to the phone. He asked excitedly, Uncle, I heard from my aunt that you raised a tiger, right? Is there really a tiger? Before Kinzu could answer, Tongton jumped directly onto her brother, opened her cute big eyes, and asked chatteringly, Uncle, my aunt said you bought a pony. Is that true? Can Tongton ride it too? Well, honey is fierce, the meat yield is not high. The original meat yield of Angus cattle is about this high. I just increased it a little bit, a little bit. Chapter 579 Family Concerns. Kinzu wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. Little sister, too. Why did you tell everything to the family? This time, I'm going to be unlucky again. As expected, no matter how noisy the two little guys were, they were not as quick as Kinzu's mother. The screen shook, and Kin's mother appeared in the video, asking with concern, Xiaozu, are you okay? Why are there tigers and whatnot? Don't make trouble all the time. Kinzu smiled awkwardly and replied quickly, Mom, don't worry, I know what to do, and the tigers are very well behaved. Kin's mother's hands trembled when she heard this, and her phone almost fell down. She asked in a trembling voice, You dead child, you really raised a tiger, what if something happens? Seeing that his mother was about to cry in a hurry, Kinzu hurriedly comforted her. Mom, don't worry, I've raised it for a long time, and there's nothing wrong. The tigers are very obedient. Kin's mother wanted to say something else, but her phone was taken away by someone. Her sister comforted her with a helpless look on her face. Mom, don't worry, there are so many people raising tigers abroad, and I haven't seen many people get into trouble. As she said that, she took the phone and walked aside, which saved Kinzu from the water and fire. Ahem, sister, thank you. Kinzu wiped his sweat and looked at his sister with a wry smile. HMPH, you little bastard, you still feel embarrassed? Kinwan looked at her brother helplessly. Why don't you raise something else? Why don't you raise a tiger? You don't even know how scared Mom was when she'd first heard about it. Isn't this fun? Kinzu smiled wryly and didn't dare to refute a word. Facing the scolding from his family, Kinzu didn't have any temper at all. Come to think of it, Mom was timid to begin with, and it was good that she didn't faint when she suddenly found out that her son raised a tiger. After talking for a while, Kinwan was a little tired. She looked at her brother helplessly and asked, What's wrong? Is there anything wrong? Kinzu came back to his senses and asked hurriedly, Sister, how is your restaurant now? Speaking of business, Kinwan stopped nagging, but said excitedly, It's almost done. Your brother-in-law and dad have been busy. After a while, we will purchase some equipment and recruit a few chefs, and then we can officially open it. Well, that's good. Kinzu smiled with satisfaction. It just so happens that I have slaughtered more than 1,000 cows here, so I'll get some beef for you. Really? Kinwan exclaimed in surprise, and then asked with some doubts, Can the cows on your ranch be slaughtered? It's only been a short time. Kinzu didn't think much about it, and said casually, Wasn't there a hurricane a few days ago? The ranch was affected and more than 1,000 cows died. What? Hurricane? Kinwan was stunned for a moment, and asked hurriedly, Are you okay? Why is there a typhoon in your place? Is it serious? Kinzu felt a little regretful after he finished speaking. Hearing his sister's question, he hurriedly said, It's okay. It happened a few days ago. The hurricane has passed. The losses of the ranch will be borne by the insurance company. Don't worry. But it was useless to explain. Kinwan's voice had been heard by Kin's mother. Although she didn't understand what a hurricane was, she still understood typhoons. So the video screen turned again and again, and it went directly to Kin's mother again. Kinzu was in a miserable situation. Kin's mother talked about him for more than an hour, and almost asked him to sell his things and come back. In the end, it was Kinwan who helped persuade her, and Kin's mother let him go. After hanging up that video, Kinzu breathed a sigh of relief. It is said that a mother worries about her son even when he is thousands of miles away. This is really true. His mother almost ran over directly. After being in a daze for a while and thinking about what he had to do tomorrow, Kinzu shifted his vision to cheese again. Deep in the dark sea, a 10-meter-long golden python slowly opened its big eyes like copper bells. After looking around, Kinzu determined his position, which was right next to the sunken ship. After swinging his thick tail, Kinzu came to the side of the sunken ship and immediately startled a large group of various sea fish. Ignoring the little guys, Kinzu focused his mind on the big ship. With a dizzy feeling, the big guy in front of him suddenly disappeared in the depths of the sea. Shaking his dizzy head, Kinzu spit fiercely. It seems that not everything can be put into the inventory. But fortunately, he finally got this guy in. Now those island dwarfs are going to be blind, right? After wandering around for a while, Kinzu slowly floated up, wanting to see if the search and rescue boats of the dwarfs were nearby. Not to mention, Kinzu was lucky. There was nothing on the sea, and there were no ships as imagined. This also disappointed Kinzu. He wanted to give those guys a hard time. Wagging his tail in boredom, Kinzu slowly searched along the seabed. After all, it was not a problem for him to put the ship on him. He wanted to throw this guy into the deep sea. After more than an hour, Kinzu finally found a big trench nearly 50 nautical miles away from the scene of the incident. Kinzu didn't know how deep it was. He only knew that this sea purchase was originally located at 600 or 700 meters below the sea. No matter how deep it was, it would not be so easy to be found by those island dwarfs here. After selecting the target, Kinzu didn't think much and threw the Orokimura directly down. Of course, his body was far away and he didn't stand stupidly beside him. Putting aside other things, the huge water flow generated by the appearance of the freighter alone directly showed a great white shark watching the excitement next to it. Well, that guy looks so familiar, as if it was the one I saw last time. Kinzu looked at the poor guy with some doubts. Forget it, who cares? Shaking his head, Kinzu turned around and swam back. Early the next morning, Kinzu got up quickly without waiting for the little girl to attack him. He had a lot of things to do today. First, he called David and consulted about the issue of getting beef into the country. As a result, David was busy in a meeting and had no time to deal with him, so he asked him to ask Jefferson to do it. Shrugging his shoulders, Kinzu called Jefferson again. After all, he was his lawyer, so he was more reliable than David. After receiving Kinzu's call, he said he would come right away. Stretching, Kinzu lay on the sofa, looked at Dale next to him and asked, "Is there anyone watching over the freezer?" Dale put down the newspaper in her hand and nodded slightly. "Well, I asked 2 people to watch over there. There will be absolutely no problem." Chapter 580 Increased Cost. Kinzu had just enjoyed a pure English breakfast prepared by Wing himself, and then he waited for Jefferson who hurried over in the villa. "Boss, what do you want to talk to me about?" Sitting on the sofa opposite, Jefferson gently wiped the sweat on his forehead with a tissue. "No big deal." Kinzu smiled and waved his hand. "I just want to ask you, if I sell beef to China, what procedures do I need to go through?" "China?" Jefferson moved his body slightly to make himself sit more comfortably, and then said, "If it was a few months ago, it would be useless to go through any documents, but it's not difficult now." "Oh? Why do you say that?" Kinzu raised his head in surprise. Jefferson smiled and explained, "Because of mad cow disease, a few months ago, China completely banned our beef from entering the country." Hearing what Jefferson said, Kinzu also remembered this matter, and his heart suddenly skipped a beat. He asked with some concern, "What do you say now? Is it okay?" Jefferson nodded, turned on his tablet to check, and smiled. "Look, there is no problem now. As long as you pass the formal quarantine, you can enter the Chinese market." "Quarantine?" Kinzu frowned. "Yes, boss, you must have a quarantine certificate from a formal quarantine agency before you can enter the country," Jefferson reminded very seriously. Looking at Jefferson, Kinzu asked, "Well, is this quarantine certificate easy to get?" "No problem, boss, you can rest assured, I will help you get it." Speaking of this, the seriousness on Jefferson's face faded, and he showed a bright smile again. Kinzu ignored the speed of his expression change and reminded him, "This matter must be done as soon as possible. I don't want you to delay too long. Do you understand?" After Jefferson agreed and hurriedly left the villa, Kinzu breathed a sigh of relief. The beef matter has finally come to an end. I hope there will be news from Jefferson as soon as possible. After waiting for a day, there was no news from Jefferson. Instead, Kinzu waited for a black stocking glasses lady in the villa. "Hey, Lin Yu, why are you here? Aren't you busy?" Kinzu said with some surprise and asked the black stocking glasses lady, who had not been seen for a few days and had become much plumper, to sit down. Lin Yu didn't hesitate to sit down on the sofa, rubbing her sore arms, and complained in a tender voice, "It's all because of the construction here. Why is there a storm?" The pavilion that has just been built is going to be moved again. Qinzu laughed and comforted her. This is just right. You can check the quality of the construction. If the typhoon comes and blows it down, I will still settle the score with you. Lin Yu curled her lips. How could I cut corners for you? You underestimate the working people of our great China. Qinzu thought about it, and it was true. When has our great China ever cut corners when doing things in foreign countries? Shrugging his shoulders, Qinzu made her a cup of kung fu tea, and then he smiled and teased. That's true. The working people of our great country have never cut corners when building things in foreign countries. Lin Yu looked at the villa with a blank look, frowned slightly, and said in a somewhat yin-yang tone, Landlord Qin's life is getting more and more carefree. How many beauties are hidden in this golden house? The smile on Qinzu's face froze there, and he coughed twice awkwardly, then counted on his fingers, pretending to count, but said, well, if you're included, it's not too many, just 15. Lin Yu couldn't help it, and the tea in her mouth sprayed out directly. Looking at Qinzu's eyes, it was just like looking at a prehistoric monster. Beast, raising so many, aren't you afraid of tiring yourself to death? No, I'm in such a good body, why should I be tired? Qinzu spread his hands, pretending not to understand what Lin Yu meant. Hearing the voice, Lin Yu was immediately choked with anger. Without saying anything, he opened the backpack he brought with him and directly put a construction order on the coffee table. What for? Looking at the order, Qinzu had a bad feeling in his heart. More money. Lin Yu rolled his eyes helplessly. All these materials are damaged. Do you still expect me to bear these losses? Qinzu was speechless for a moment, feeling that he had asked a rather stupid question. He didn't say anything at the moment, and took the construction order and read it carefully. Well, the shelves need to be bought, the ceiling needs to be bought, and the glazed tiles need to be customized. After looking at a lot of things, Qinzu felt a little dizzy and still couldn't figure it out. Just tell me how much more I need to invest. Impatiently throwing the newspaper on the coffee table, Qinzu looked at Lin Yu seriously. Being stared at by Qinzu like this, Lin Yu was a little nervous. After taking out a calculator, he started to calculate. Hey, Qin, you still need to pay us half of the money. This is the lowest. Half. Qinzu was a little speechless. So much? Yes, Qin, we have to repurchase many things. This amount of money will definitely not be a problem for you. Lin Yu looked at Qinzu with a great expression, wanting to know how he would react. Qinzu didn't react much. This amount of money was really nothing to him, not to mention that the insurance company had already paid. So, under Lin Yu's surprised eyes, Qinzu wrote a check and handed it over. Lin Yu was a little embarrassed holding the check. She thought Qinzu would bargain, but Lin Yu Qinzu was so straightforward. It's okay, just take it, and finish this project as soon as possible. It feels like a long time. Speaking of this fish tank, Qinzu felt a little tired. MMP, it's just a fish tank. It has been built since I moved into the ranch, and I haven't seen the finished product yet. After seeing off the move Lin Yu, Qinzu had just laid down for a while when his phone rang again. What, once, do you also need to sign a contract? Qinzu hung up the phone in confusion. How could he dare to do all the good things together now? After a while, Once, dressed in a straight black suit, sat in front of Qinzu. What's the matter? Once, how much are you going to increase? Qinzu asked directly. Once smiled awkwardly, then said a little embarrassedly, Mr. Qin, it's like this. The company discussed it and thought that our cost should be increased. Then how much are you going to increase? Qinzu was a little impatient. He was a grown man, why couldn't he be more straightforward? Thanks to the prestige of the bear child for the reward of 500 starting coins, and thanks to the reward of 500 starting coins of Haixao 006. Chapter 581 White Tiger out of the cage. After Rongs left the villa, Qinzu sat on the sofa and sighed deeply. Damn, they are all a bunch of vampires. Although he had expected to spend this money, he still felt a little distressed when the moment came. The cowshed was rebuilt, the dairy factory was rebuilt, and the sprinkler system was reset. The deposit in Qinzu's account was reduced by a large amount. The insurance company's compensation funds have not yet arrived. If it weren't for the sale of the dragon pattern porcelain bottle, Qinzu would really be a little stretched. There are only more than 20 million left in the card, plus more than 20 million from the sale of silver, and the deposit in the card is only more than $50 million. Fortunately, he sold a few fish and made some money. With the 50 million from the sale of the dragon pattern porcelain bottle, his card has now increased to more than 120 million. After thinking for a while, Kinzu took out his mobile phone and called Stanley. Since we are going to rebuild, let's start together. Stanley was not very surprised to receive Kinzu's call. Although the dog was well built, it does not include resistance to these natural disasters. The next day, when it was still dawn and Kinzu was still mumbling in his sleep, Stanley brought a group of people to the ranch. Without disturbing Kinzu, the group said hello to Eva and went directly to the dog. When Kinzu woke up, it was almost noon. It was not that he slept in, but mainly because he controlled Cheese to take a lap on the seabed last night. It is already the end of November, and it will be December in a few days. His plan to go out to sea to hunt bluefin tuna can only be ruined. However, Kinzu's interest in the sunken ship is even greater. After all, he has so many antiques, and he must have an explanation of their origin. It is impossible that he has so many antiques without any rumors. In this way, he has an excuse. Even if those island dwarfs have found it, they can say that it was salvaged from the seabed. As for why it is so similar? Nonsense, who knows about this? I still want to ask you. Anyway, they all came from China, who knows if they are together? Thinking about this, Kinzu walked downstairs slowly and greeted the people in the living room. Shirley wrinkled her nose, looked at Kinzu with a wronged face, and muttered, "Bad uncle." I agreed to play with Shirley. Kinzu touched his nose awkwardly. No way, uncle got up to play with Shirley. Sitting on the sofa, hugging the aggrieved little girl, Kinzu felt a little ashamed. He didn't know what was wrong with him these days. He was particularly sleepy, let alone playing with the little girl. Even looking for Eva to be intimate with him was much less interested. Seeing that Kinzu's attitude of admitting his mistakes was not bad, the little girl became happy and smiled. She hugged Kinzu's neck and kissed him, and said with a smile, "Uncle, let's go out to play today, okay?" "Oh? Where to play?" Kinzu was curious again. Could the little girl not stay on the ranch? "Let's go fishing. The little turtle has nothing to eat." The little girl pouted and pointed to the fish tank over there. "Hey, this guy is still alive!" Kinzu exclaimed, and then he found that the little hawksbill turtle was still staying in the fish tank. During the hurricane, Kinzu had no time to take care of this guy. He thought it had met with a disaster, but he didn't expect that this guy was still here. "Yes, I haven't fed it much these days. Look, it has lost weight." Looking at the serious look of the little girl, Kinzu's mouth twitched twice. This guy has lost weight. Why didn't I see it? Although he was a little suspicious of the little girl's eyes, since the little girl said it, Kinzu did not refute it, and agreed happily. However, things were not so satisfactory. Just when Kinzu was about to take the little girl out, Jefferson called. "Boss, the matter is basically settled, and the documents have been obtained. When do you think we can start shipping to China?" "Don't worry about this, I'll ask first." Kinzu touched his nose. It was another busy day. After hanging up the phone, looking at the little girl's expectant eyes, Kinzu forcibly suppressed the thought of making a phone call. Anyway, it's night over there now, so he can call back during the day. After comforting himself, Kinzu took the excited little girl, took the landing net, and drove a four-wheel motorcycle to the big lake. In the late autumn pasture, the purple alfalfa is just like its name, blooming with purple flowers. The wind blew gently, and the endless purple wheat waves fluttered in the wind, which was really a feeling. Kinzu rode a four-wheel motorcycle with the little girl, talking and laughing all the way to the big lake. Of course, the one who talked must be Kinzu, and the one who laughed happily was the little girl. Every time this time came, the little girl would feel a sense of being spoiled and alienated, and this feeling made her indulge in it. Kinzu didn't know how the little girl felt. He still had a lot of ways to deal with children, and he coaxed the little girl all the way to make her smile from ear to ear. As for the guy following the four-wheeled motorcycle, it was a white tiger jogging leisurely. Originally, this guy didn't want to come over. It was so comfortable to lie under the porch. However, Kinzu saw that the white tiger seemed to have grown a circle in just a few days, so he lifted it up by its ears. Of course, behind the white tiger, his two lazy sons were indispensable. Not to mention, facing the morning sun, the jaguar figure constantly jumping in the pasture was still very beautiful. Kinzu couldn't help but pick up the camera and took a few consecutive photos. Well, Kinzu's photography style is this. No matter whether the photos are good or not, after finding the right lens, take a few photos first. Anyway, digital cameras don't need film. After walking a short distance, the jaguar suddenly slowed down, bent down slightly, and began to approach a place step by step. Did you find prey? Kinzu was a little curious, but more of it was expectation. He had never seen a tiger hunting before. Could it be a chance encounter this time? Thinking of this, Kinzu was not in a hurry to run, but raised his camera, looking forward to a certain scene. Just as Kinzu expected, the jaguar did find its prey. After crawling forward for a long time, just when Kinzu was getting impatient, the white tiger in the distance suddenly straightened up and let out a powerful tiger roar. Originally, as the king of the deep forest, it was already intimidating enough, and now at this roar, it directly scared the prey in front of it. Thank you for the 200 starting coins reward from Zijunya. Thank you. Chapter 582 Chef. It was not until the jaguar had dealt with the guy in front of him cleanly that Kinzu finally reacted and covered the little girl's eyes. You bastard, don't you know how to restrain yourself? After scolding him fiercely, Kinzu stepped on the accelerator and left the scene in an instant. There was no way. Who made this guy so bloody? Kinzu was fine, but it would be bad if he scared the little girl. The unlucky guy targeted by the jaguar was a jackal that ran in from nowhere. Although this thing was not as dangerous as tigers and leopards, it was not small. It was just that I didn't know how it got into the ranch, and it seemed to be alone. Shaking his head, Kinzu had no time to think about these things, because the little girl was making trouble with him. Shirley pouted her lips in dissatisfaction, and she was still a little upset about Kinzu not letting her see the tiger. Okay, little girl, it's Uncle's fault. I won't cover your eyes anymore, okay? Kinzu had no choice but to raise his hands and surrender in the face of the little girl's pitiful and aggrieved eyes. Really? The little girl didn't believe it. Really, it's more real than real gold, Kinzu swore. The little girl pouted her lips, retracted her resentful eyes, and said with a grin, Uncle is so nice, let's go fishing. Although Kinzu was successfully tricked by the little girl, he was not dissatisfied. He just pinched her pink little face and scolded with a smile. Who did you learn from? You're so good at acting now. Shirley opened her big eyes, looked at Kinzu innocently, and muttered, Of course I learned it from my mother, Uncle, you're so stupid. Kinzu was completely Spartan now. Okay, you win. Think about it, following a mother who is a movie queen, how can you not learn something? After a busy morning, Kinzu finally returned with a full load. As a punishment, the little girl would be responsible for feeding the little hawksbill turtle from now on. However, the little girl showed great interest in this hard-won job, patting her chest and promising to complete the task. After lunch, Kinzu asked Eva to take the little girl to take a nap, and he went to the dock to inspect and see how Stanley was doing. Seeing Kinzu come in, Stanley greeted him warmly. Clean, I'm really sorry, our quality still needs to be improved. Kinzu shook hands with him politely, and joked with a smile. That's true. We can't even withstand a hurricane. What if there is a tsunami in the future? Kinzu originally just said it casually, but unexpectedly Stanley said very seriously. Clean, don't worry, as long as the entire dock is not flooded, this dock will definitely have no problem facing a tsunami. Although Kinzu sneered at these words in his heart, he didn't want to argue with him seriously, so he smiled and changed the subject. By the way, Stanley, when can you finish it this time? What about the price? Stanley smiled and shook his head. Clean, don't worry, I will definitely finish it for you before the holiday. After hesitating for a while, Stanley rubbed his hands and continued. As for the price, the president said that you only need to pay for the labor fee, and forget about the rest. Kinzu was not surprised about this. He had the closest relationship with this company and met the quality requirements in the contract. After looking around, Kinzu found that the progress was indeed very fast. Some places had even been repaired again, and there was no trace at all. Awesome, Stanley, I really didn't see it. Kinzu looked at Stanley with admiration on his face. In the evening, Kinzu, who had been busy all day, returned to the villa. After eating something casually, he returned to the bedroom, took out his mobile phone and a video popped up directly. What's wrong, Xiaoxiu? It's only been a short time, have you finished it? Qinwan looked at her brother in the video with a surprised face. She just got up, isn't this too active? Nothing, I just want to ask how things are going over there. I can ship the goods anytime. Kinzu said calmly. Is that so? Qinwan first affirmed his plan, but then said with some worry. The decoration is no problem, but what about recruiting workers? Other waiters and other things are easy to deal with, but we haven't found a suitable chef yet. Qinzu frowned a little when he heard this. It's just talk that they can't find a chef. For such a big county, it's no problem to find hundreds of chefs. But there is a prerequisite: they want people who can cook Western food, not those who only know how to use big spoons. Thinking of this, Qinzu scratched his hair in an upset state, and could only say helplessly, "If you really can't find it over there, I'll keep an eye out for you here." Hearing what Qinzu said, Qinwan's face was almost smiling, and she nodded quickly and said, "Okay, then you keep an eye out. I still think the Western restaurant is better." After chatting for a while, seeing that his sister didn't know anything, Qinzu was a little annoyed, and directly called his brother-in-law. After all, he followed up in person, and his brother-in-law knew much more about this restaurant than his sister. Until the end of the video call with his sister, Qinzu scratched his head, feeling that he had worked in vain tonight, and he didn't get anything useful. The next day, after Qinzu got up, he didn't accompany the little girl anymore. After breakfast, he took his 2 personal female bodyguards, drove the night the 15th, and headed directly to Boston. Chen Mu was very surprised when he saw Qinzu, and asked, "Boss, how did you have time to come here?" Qinzu smiled and waved at him. After sitting down on the sofa in the office, he said, "Brother Chen, I really came to ask you for help this time." "Oh?" Chen Mu was a little curious, and said hurriedly, "Boss, tell me, if there is anything I can help with, I will do my best to help." Qinzu took the teacup handed over by Chen Mu personally. He didn't rush to talk about business, but joked, "Brother Chen, I think you also need a secretary. Why don't you get one for yourself?" Speaking of this, Chen Mu was a little embarrassed. He waved his hand and said, "Let's not talk about this. Boss, just tell me what you want to say." Qinzu became interested when he saw this. Is there any story behind it? But seeing that he didn't want to say it, he didn't ask again, but said, "It's like this. I also opened a Western restaurant in my hometown. I wanted to ask if you have any familiar chefs or something." "Chef?" Chen Mu thought for a while, then said, "Yes, there are, but I don't know if they're willing to go to China. Si est escuchando Western novela en un canal distinto a mundo fanfic novelas, significat lo descarga and y subieron sinis fuetzos invitamos cordialmente a visitar nuestro canal. Mundo fanfic novelas all encontras la versión original de esta historia y podrás explorar muchas otras novelas de diversos narradores. Te esperamos para sumergirte en un mundo de novelas increíbles." Chapter 583 Bob. Oh? Who is it? Qinzu looked up at Chen Mu, wanting to know who he recommended. Chen Mu smiled, took a sip from the teacup, and said, "It's one of my apprentices. He has been with me for a long time. Now he can work on his own, no problem." "A family member?" Qinzu frowned. Since he was looking for a chef from abroad, he wanted to find a foreigner to go back. After all, it's easier to get a foreign monk to chant sutras. In his hometown, a foreigner can support the restaurant, and the restaurant's level will be raised immediately. No. Chen Mu shook his head. "He's a white man, and an orphan. He's been with me for almost 5 or 6 years. Qinzu was satisfied now, and nodded with a smile. "Then you can talk to him and see what he means." Seeing Chen Mu nod, Qinzu continued, "Time is a bit tight. Do this as soon as possible. My restaurant is still waiting to open." The smile on Chen Mu's face was slightly restrained, and he said seriously, "Then I will go to talk to him later." "Well, go ahead." Seeing that Chen Mu listened to his words, Qinzu said with satisfaction, "Don't worry, I won't treat him unfairly in terms of treatment. 10% of the net profit of the restaurant is his." Chen Mu couldn't help but be a little surprised when he heard it. What a big deal. 10% of the net profit of a Western restaurant may not seem to be a very high proportion, but it is definitely a lot of money. For a restaurant with a monthly profit of 100,000, 5% would be 10,000 yuan. And if a Western restaurant with an investment of several million has a monthly profit of only 100,000, it will not be long before closing. If the monthly profit can reach 1 million, then his salary will reach 100,000 a month. Of course, all the money here is in RMB, but even so, if converted into US dollars, it is more than 10,000 US dollars. This salary income is definitely a high income group even in the United States. After Qinzu left the restaurant, Chen Mu could no longer sit still, picked up the phone and called. Not long after, a white young man who looked to be in his 20s knocked on the door and walked in. "Master, are you looking for me?" After seeing Chen Mu, the white man greeted him a little stiffly. Chen Mu nodded, motioned him to sit down, hesitated for a moment, and said, "Bob, you have been with me for several years." Bob heard this, and his heart skipped a beat. "This feeling is a bit bad. Master, it's been more than 6 years. It was thanks to you that I didn't starve to death on the streets of New York." As he said this, Bob's eyes were a little red, and at this moment he showed some true feelings. Looking at Bob's expression, Chen Mu was also touched. Thinking back to the beginning, he was taken in by his master in the same way. After calming down, Chen Mu showed a gentle smile, stood up and came to Bob, patted his shoulder and said, "Now your cooking skills can be considered as a master. There is a job here. Do you have any interest?" "Master, you say?" Bob looked at Chen Mu without any change in his expression. "Well," Chen Mu nodded gently and continued, "you also know that our restaurant has been acquired now. The big boss also has a restaurant in China. Now he needs a chef. I want to hear your opinion." Bob nodded, "Master, I have no problem." Chen Mu was stunned. He didn't expect that he would agree without even asking about the salary. This is really different from Europeans and Americans. You know that Europeans and Americans are generally self-centered. Let alone master and apprentice, even father and son, sometimes it doesn't work. This is also the reason why Chen Mu didn't promise Qin Zhu, because he was not sure how Bob would react to the news. What he didn't expect was that things would go so smoothly. Nodding with satisfaction, Chen Mu said with a smile, "Don't worry, the salary there is not low. 10% of the restaurant's net profit is yours. If you do well, an annual income of $100,000 is not a problem." Now, it was Bob's turn to be surprised. You know, his current weekly salary is only a little over $1,000. In this way, it has more than doubled. "Master, thank you." Bob looked at Chen Mu, and he didn't know what to say excitedly. Chen Mu waved his hand and said seriously, "Bob, you have to remember that this is given to you by the big boss. After you go back to China, you must work hard and never do anything reckless." Bob nodded seriously, indicating that he understood. After Qin Zhu left the restaurant, he did not go anywhere else, but went directly to Jefferson. Seeing Qin Zhu, Jefferson handed over a stack of documents and said with a smile, "Boss, it's almost done. They just need to go to the warehouse to take a look." Qin Zhu reached out to take the documents and flicked through them casually. Seeing that they were all certification documents, he was not interested in reading them. Instead, he asked, "In that case, when can I send the beef over?" Jefferson shrugged, "Boss, anytime." After getting a satisfactory answer, Qin Zhu took the certification documents back to the ranch. Now he just had to wait for news from Chen Mu. Fortunately, Chen Mu did not let Qin Zhu wait any longer. Later that day, Qin Zhu was in the villa and received his call. After hanging up the phone, Qin Zhu couldn't help but show a satisfied smile on his face. Chen Mu was really good at doing things. Since the personnel had been confirmed, Qin Zhu started to prepare. However, before that, he had one more thing to deal with. That was the visa. If Chen Mu's apprentice wanted to go to China, Qin Zhu would definitely have to go back with him. After all, Qin Zhu was not sure whether a foreigner who had never been to China could find his small county. But if he wanted to return to China, he would need a visa. After all, he was now an overseas Chinese in the United States. Picking up the phone, Qin Zhu called Jefferson directly. It was more reassuring to let him handle such matters. After everything was settled, Qin Zhu explained to Eva and old John, and prepared to take Dale with him. But facing the aggrieved look of little Shirley, Qin Zhu really couldn't bear it. "Hey, little girl, Uncle will be back in a few days. Let's not be like this, okay?" Qin Zhu looked at the little girl helplessly. "I really couldn't bear to leave like this. Uncle, Shirley wants to go too." Shirley looked at Qin Zhu like that. "Uncle is going to do serious business, not to play." "Uncle, Shirley wants to go too." "Shirley, be good, Uncle will be back in a few days." "Uncle, Shirley wants to go too." Okay, then let's go together." Qin Zhu stroked his forehead, a little overwhelmed. "You silly girl, don't you know how to change your words?" Chapter 584. Returning to the country again. The next day, Qin Zhu took Dale and the little girl with him and set off for Boston. This time when he returned to China, Qin Zhu did not bring Erica with him. It was understandable that he brought a female bodyguard with him, but if both of them were female bodyguards, he felt that he would never be able to clear his name even if he jumped into the Yellow River. Of course, as to whether he was clear or not, only he knew. When he arrived in Boston, Kinzu also met the chef that Chen Mu introduced to him, a white young man in his 20s with a crew cut. Seeing Kinzu come in, Chen Mu hurriedly came up to him and introduced him. "Boss, this is Bob, my apprentice." After saying that, he looked at Bob. Bob understood and quickly stepped forward and said stiffly, "Boss, hello." Kinzu smiled and stretched out his hand to shake his hand. "Yes, Bob, right. I'll have to rely on you for the restaurants in China in the future." Hearing this, Bob showed a simple and honest smile and patted his chest to assure, "Boss, I will do my best." After the two finished exchanging greetings, Chen Mu pulled Kinzu aside and asked, "Boss, are they only short of a head chef over there? Do you want to bring a few kitchen helpers from here?" Kinzu was tempted when he heard this, but after thinking about it, he shook his head and said, "Forget it, I'd better train him myself. After all, it's a new store and a small county. It's good enough if we don't lose money." After hearing this, Chen Mu nodded in agreement and didn't say anything. Kinzu and his companions rushed to New York with Bob, who was a little reserved. After arriving in New York and having a simple lunch, Kinzu and his companions did not stop and boarded the plane to Jiangnan without stopping. As for the beef, Erica and her team had already arranged for it to be entrusted to Kinzu before he came to New York, so Kinzu did not need to worry about it. After a night of flying, the plane finally landed at Jiangnan International Airport in the afternoon of the next day. As soon as he walked out of the airport, Kinzu saw the second brother who came to pick him up. This guy was still the same, leaning against the BMW car in a lazy manner, his eyes narrowed into a line, and he kept glancing at the beautiful women passing by. Until Kinzu came in front of him, the guy didn't even raise his head, and said impatiently, "What are you doing? Don't block the road." Kinzu couldn't help but raise a few black lines on his face, and cursed angrily, "Fatty, where are you looking?" Hearing Kinzu's voice, Min raised his head and said with a smile, "Who am I talking about?" It turns out that the rich man is back. Kinzu ignored his jokes, but directly loaded all the things on the truck, and said angrily, "Wait at the door, I'll go to handle the handover of the goods." After saying that, without waiting for the fat man to speak, Kinzu was busy going to handle the entry procedures for his beef. The fat man had already found a refrigerated truck. After Kinzu handled the procedures, the beef was directly loaded onto the refrigerated truck. After instructing the driver a few words, Kinzu watched the car slowly drive away, and then he breathed a sigh of relief. "Wow, this procedure is really troublesome, and I don't know if I can make back the freight this time." Since it was his first time, Kinzu didn't get too much, just 5 tons of beef, 1 ton of which was premium grade, 3 tons of standard grade, and 1 ton of commercial grade. He was also here to test the waters and see which kind of beef was more popular. After all, it wasn't a big city, and Kinzu didn't plan to raise the price just because his beef tasted good. It's not that Kinzu didn't want to make money, but the market was there. Even if your beef was delicious, if the price was outrageous, only a few people would buy it. So, Kinzu only got 1 ton of premium grade beef to test the waters and see what the consumption power of his small county was like. When Kinzu came back, he was about to get in the car, but was stopped by the fat man. Pulling Kinzu aside, the fat man looked him up and down with a wretched look on his face, and kept making strange tsk sounds from his mouth. Kinzu was a little scared by the fat man, and couldn't help but scold, "Fatty, what are you doing?" Min didn't mind, and said with a strange smile, "Not bad, third brother, I didn't expect that you even have a child, you really kept it a secret." Kinzu was stunned, and then looked at this guy speechlessly. Didn't he use his brain? It was rare to deal with this guy. Kinzu directly stretched out his hand and said, "Give it to me." "What?" Min was a little confused. "Car keys." Hearing this, Min subconsciously handed over the keys in his hand and said blankly, "What do you want the keys for?" Kinzu didn't say anything nonsense. After taking the keys, he opened the car door and sat in the driver's seat. Min saw this and just wanted to get in the car, but saw Kinzu directly started the car. "Drive forward." Hey, third brother, you just left me here." Min stood there and felt like crying. "I came to pick you up with good intentions, and you treat me like this." Kinzu opened the window and waved his hand, without even showing his head, and laughed loudly. "Fatty, just run back, just think of it as losing weight." Ignoring the angry Min, Kinzu drove to his hometown with a smile on his face. The little girl was quiet all the way, so quiet that Kinzu was a little worried. "Shirley, what's wrong?" Turning his head to look at the little girl in the back seat, Kinzu asked with some concern. Uncle, I'm fine, it's just that there are so many people here. Shirley shook her head and looked at the traffic outside the window curiously. There are many more cars here than in the United States. Kinzu was slightly relieved when he saw this. He was really afraid that the little girl would return to her previous state. Kinzu and Dale took turns driving on the road. After running all the way, they finally rushed back to their hometown around 9 o'clock in the evening. After booking a room for the two in the hotel, Kinzu took the nervous little girl home. Kinzu looked at the pitiful look of the little girl and couldn't help but tease in. What's wrong, little girl, you still know how to be nervous? Shirley was a little nervous when she heard this, and she almost cried when Kinzu said that. Kinzu was a little amused and helpless when he saw this. He had never seen a little girl like this before. After holding the little girl and comforting her for a while, Kinzu also came to the door of his sister's house and knocked hard with his hand. Because he came back suddenly this time, Kinzu forgot to tell his family and didn't know if they were asleep. Fortunately, Kinzu only knocked a few times, and then he heard footsteps coming from inside, and then the security doors opened from the inside. Uncle, it's Uncle who is back. Seeing Kinzu at the door, Lady, who opened the door, was stunned for a long time, and then he shouted excitedly. It didn't matter that he shouted, the whole family was startled by him, and even his parents who had already gone to bed came out in pajamas. Thanks to the Wanderer Brother for the 500 starting coins reward. Chapter 585. Preparing for opening. In the early morning, the sun shines through the French windows, illuminating this small bedroom. Kinzu, who was sleeping, suddenly felt his nose itchy, and couldn't help sneezing several times, and then he woke up. Rubbing his sleepy eyes, Kinzu looked at the three little guys in front of him and asked in confusion, "Why are you all here?" As soon as he finished speaking, Tongton and Lily couldn't help but giggle, and even Shirley showed a smile at the corner of her mouth. At this time, looking at Lily's little hands behind his back, Kinzu realized that it must be these little guys who played a prank just now. "Okay, you dare to tease me, let me see how I deal with you." Raising his hands, Kinzu pretended to get up and catch them. Seeing this, the little guys screamed a few times, stepped on their short legs, and fled the scene with laughter. Kinzu smiled behind him, got up and changed his clothes, and then walked out of the room. In the living room, King's mother was talking to Shirley about something, while her younger sister was translating beside her. There was no way. Although the little girl was Chinese, she lived in the United States after all and had learned English since she was a child. She didn't feel anything when she was at the ranch, but this time she was a little confused. Fortunately, it was a day off today and her younger sister was rarely at home, so it was no problem to do some simple translation. Seeing Kinzu coming out, the younger sister wrinkled her cute little nose and said dissatisfiedly, "Brother, you're even lazier than me." Kinzu shrugged, leaned on the sofa, and asked, "Where are Dad and brother-in-law? Did they go to the store?" King's mother nodded when she heard this. "Yeah, they went early in the morning." Then, King's mother muttered a little dissatisfiedly, "You two, why did you bring so much beef at once? What if you lose money?" Kinzu heard this, and a few black lines appeared on his head. "Why are you thinking about losing money before opening the business?" After laughing dryly twice, Kinzu had to explain, "Mom, these beefs won't sell for much money, it's good for Dad and brother-in-law to practice." Hearing what Kinzu said, King's mother became even more dissatisfied and couldn't help nagging again. Kinzu covered his head with a headache, and quickly interrupted his mother's long speech and asked, "Mom, is there anything to eat? I'm almost starving." After hearing this, King's mother stopped nagging her son, stood up and said, "The kitchen has left some for you, I'll heat it up for you." After King's mother walked away, the younger sister Kinru came over with a pouty mouth. "What's wrong? Who made our little princess angry?" Kinzu hugged the somewhat restrained Shirley, and teased his younger sister with a smile. "HMPH, Kinru snorted in a naive way, muttering, "Mom is too partial. If others sleep in, they will go hungry, but if you sleep in, I will leave food for you." Seeing that his little sister was so serious, Kinzu almost laughed out loud. Just for such a small thing, the little girl is jealous. Seeing Kinzu like this, Kinru rolled her eyes at him in dissatisfaction and said aggrievedly, "I can't even sleep in. Even on my day off, you have to wake me up. If I don't get up, I won't have any food." As she was talking, King's mother came out of the kitchen and scolded with a smile, "You dead girl, when did you lack food? You just know how to sleep in all day, and now you don't even study." Hearing this, Kinru snorted in dissatisfaction and said proudly, "Anyway, I will go to the United States to study, and the things I learn here will be useless. Seeing the mother and daughter teasing each other, Kinzu didn't say anything. As a result, he wolfed down the breakfast his mother brought. After finishing breakfast, Kinzu gave Shirley a few words before leaving. On the way, Kinzu recalled the frightened expressions of his parents when they first met yesterday, and he couldn't help but smile and shook his head. It turned out that the old couple were a little shocked to see their son bringing back such a big little girl. Especially Kin's mother, who thought it was Kinzu's illegitimate daughter at first, and nervously pulled Kinzu aside to ask about it. While thinking, Kinzu came to the hotel, found Dale and Bob, and drove them to the destination. When he arrived at the restaurant, Kinzu did not call his father, but took a few people and walked directly into the restaurant that had been almost decorated. "Xiaozu, come and see, how is the decoration here?" Seeing Kinzu come in, Kin's father came over with a proud face to show off. Kinzu looked around and nodded. It was very good. After all, there was a lot of money to spend. If it was not well decorated, it would be too embarrassing. "How is it? When are you going to open?" Kinzu looked at his father with a smile. Kin's father shook his head, sighed, and said helplessly, "The chef has not been found yet. The capable ones are unwilling to come, and those who come are all of ordinary level, and I don't like them." Kinzu heard this and then remembered Bob behind him. He pointed behind him and said with a smile, "Dad, look what I prepared for you." Kin's father looked at the somewhat restrained white man behind his son, his mind turned, and asked curiously, "Who is this? Chef?" Kinzu nodded, smiled and introduced himself to the two of them, and then they walked in together. After chatting for a while, Kinzu suddenly remembered something and asked, "By the way, the beef has arrived, can the restaurant put it in?" Speaking of this, Kin's father smiled and said, "It arrived early in the morning, and there is no problem with the restaurant's cold storage. But didn't you get too much this time? When will it be sold?" Kinzu shrugged. Even though there were a lot of beefs, if the business was booming, he didn't know if he could last for half a month. After walking around the restaurant, Kinzu introduced Bob to his brother-in-law, then he left with satisfaction. When he returned home and saw Kin's mother, Kinzu raised the beef in his hand, smiled and showed off. "Mom, look, this is the beef raised on my ranch. Let's try it at noon." Seeing this, Kin's mother smiled and nodded. She was also a little curious. What kind of beef would they dare to sell so expensively? Especially when she heard that this price was still the lowest price in the United States, Kin's mother was even more curious. At noon, Dad and brother-in-law came back, and even Bob was pulled back by Kin's father. He said that they were unfamiliar with the place and it was not easy for them to come here, so how could they not have a meal? Kin's mother cooked at noon. There was no other way. Although Kin's father wanted to try Bob's cooking skills, they were guests now. You can't let the guests cook, right? Bob was a little restrained, especially when he was at the same table with Kinzu's family, and their language was not very fluent, so he felt a little uncomfortable. Kinzu was happy on the side. He was really happy, so he was picking up dishes for his family with a smile on his face and promoting the benefits of these beef. Chapter 586. Hot opening. Mother Kin was a little skeptical. She picked up the beef in the bowl and took a bite, then nodded with satisfaction. "Well, it seems that my cooking skills have improved again." Kinzu was about to say something, but was hit back by his mother. He looked up at the ceiling in silence. It was the first time he realized that his mother was also quite narcissistic. Father Kin was very fair, however, after tasting it, he nodded and praised, "It's really good, it tastes better than ordinary beef." Kinzu showed a smile on his face and asked, "Dad, do you know how much this beef costs per pound in the United States?" Father Kin looked up when he heard the words, and tentatively asked, 200? Kinzu nodded, "About that." Father Kin breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "I thought it was very expensive, isn't it a little more expensive than in China?" The corners of Kinzu's mouth twitched slightly, and he said, "I was talking about US dollars. Puff. The brother-in-law almost spit out the wine he had just drunk. He looked up at Kinzu in astonishment and asked blankly, "Xiaozu, what did you say just now? US dollars?" Kinzu nodded and said, "Of course, this kind of beef is more than $300 a kilogram in the United States. If converted into RMB, it is more than 1,000 per pound." TSK. The little sister next to her couldn't help but smacking her cute little lips, looking at the plates of beef in front of her, her heart full of excitement. All this is money. A pound of beef costs more than 1,000. Who has eaten it? Thinking in her heart, the younger sister did not say anything. The chopsticks in her hand did not stop at all. While eating, she muttered, "Such expensive beef cannot be wasted." Kinzu was very upset when he heard it. He looked at his younger sister and wondered whether he should teach her a lesson. In the end, it was Kin's mother who couldn't stand it anymore and hit her hard, which made the younger sister restrain herself a little. A sumptuous lunch ended with laughter and joy. After the meal, Kin's father made a few cups of tea, and several people sat on the balcony, enjoying the relaxation of the late autumn afternoon. After a moment of silence, Kinzu looked at his brother-in-law and asked again, "Brother-in-law, have you decided on the opening time?" The brother-in-law looked at his father first, then nodded, and then said, "Tentatively set it for 2 days later, and there are some things to prepare." Kinzu heard this, nodded gently, and then asked, "What about publicity? How do you arrange it?" "Publication." Kin's father was a little confused. "Isn't it enough to set off firecrackers for the opening? What kind of publicity is needed?" Kinzu covered his head and said helplessly, "Dad, didn't you hear a saying?" "What?" Kin's father looked curious. "Good wine needs no bush. If you don't promote it, who will know that there is a restaurant opening here?" Kin's father heard it and felt that there was some truth. But when it comes to publicity, not to mention him, even his brother-in-law next to him was at a loss, not knowing what to do. Seeing this, Kinzu thought about it carefully, and then said, "First, print some flyers and hire people to distribute them, and then see if we can advertise on TV. It doesn't need to be a high-end TV station, as long as it is our city or county station." Kin's father heard this and asked uncertainly, "Is this okay?" Kinzu touched his nose. "It should be okay, I think people do it this way." Kin's father thought about it and said, "Then let's do it, I'll make arrangements now." It's not to mention that since Kin's father took care of the restaurant, it seems that the second spring of his life has exploded, and the whole person is very excited. He made arrangements quickly in the afternoon for the things that were decided in the morning. 2 days later, on a sunny morning, accompanied by a long string of firecrackers, the first store of the Waxia Kin's restaurant chain officially opened. There were no flowers, no ribbons, but the flow of people was not small. According to Kinzu's instructions, especially under the matchmaking of his younger sister Kinru, Kin's father hired a lot of students to help distribute flyers. Moreover, a 1-minute-long advertisement was broadcasted during prime time on the county TV station. A high-end Western restaurant, pure imported beef, and a blonde foreign chef, all of which made the people in this small county talk about it with great relish. Looking at the endless stream of people, Kinzu and his son, as well as his brother-in-law and sister upstairs, couldn't help but smile. When the first day's turnover came out, Kin's father was even more shocked. 100,000. The turnover on the first day reached 100,000. After deducting the cost of water, electricity, rent, labor, and food, the net profit for today was nearly 50,000. Ahem, under the instigation of Kinzu, the black-hearted landlord, the net profit of this restaurant is almost as high as 50%. Such an expensive thing, there are still so many people eating it. Kin's mother muttered in a low voice with some disbelief. Kinzu curled his lips and explained to his mother, "Of course, Mom, don't underestimate the people in our county. Everyone doesn't dress well, but there are a lot of rich people." "That's true. There are dozens of millionaires in our county that I know of." His brother-in-law nodded in agreement. When the performance at the next day came out, Kinzu was no longer calm. 150,000. With a turnover of 150,000 a day, not only did Kin's father and mother feel uneasy, but Kinzu was also a little shocked. This is just a restaurant with a small area and an investment of only a few million. If it continues like this, doesn't it mean that the cost can be recovered in about a year? But when the performance was so good every day for 7 consecutive days, Kinzu had to admit that there were really a lot of rich people in the county. But in this way, the beef would not last for 2 months, let alone half a month. After hesitating for a long time, and Kinzu received several more calls, he reluctantly said goodbye to his family and boarded the plane back to the United States again. After returning the car to the fat man in Jiangnan, Kinzu walked into the airport leisurely amid his spitting and scolding. After more than 10 hours of flight, the flight finally landed in New York. Holding Shirley, who was a little depressed, Kinzu walked out of the airport with a wry smile and said, "Now you know, isn't it boring? I'll take you the next time. Will you go?" Shirley shook her head hurriedly when she heard it. "Still going?" This time she was almost suffocated. Kinzu smiled. "Children are children. it's better to stay at home. After leaving the airport, Kinzu ate a little in New York, and then Dale drove the car, and the few of them set off directly on the road back to the ranch. If you say that Kinzu was in a hurry to come back this time, one is because the beef reserves are running low, and the other is because he received an unexpected call. I'm so sleepy, I'm out of the update, crying. Chapter 587 Hunter's phone call. The call was from Prince Hunter. He didn't say anything special, but just invited him to go to the Appalachian Mountains in a few days. Although Kinzu felt strange about this invitation, he didn't hesitate, but agreed very readily. Who would want to miss the opportunity to get along well with a prince of a country? So he put down his family affairs and ran back in a hurry. When the car arrived at the ranch, it was almost 3 o'clock in the afternoon. At the door of the villa, Eva, who received the news, was waiting outside with a smile. "Boss, you're back so soon. Didn't you stay at home for a few more days?" Seeing Kinzu get out of the car, Eva came up with a smile, picked up the little girl from the back seat, and asked, "Honey, did you have fun these days?" Shirley drooped her head and said weakly, "It's not fun, Uncle doesn't accompany me to go out to play." "I've said, Uncle is going to do business, who asked you to go with him?" Kinzu scratched his head awkwardly when he heard this. He was busy with the restaurant opening these days, so how could he have time to take the little girl out to play? Besides, the little girl can't speak Chinese, so she is a little worried about her mother taking her. Her bad uncle just didn't take me out to play. Shirley hid in Eva's arms and began to complain to her sister Eva about her uncle's hatefulness. Kinzu shrugged helplessly when he saw this, turned around and walked into the villa. Before he entered the door, the two little things, Daha and Xiaohe, greeted him happily, wagging their tails. "Little guy, did you miss me?" Kinzu squatted down, picked up the two growing little huskies, and rubbed their handsome faces hard. After entering the villa, Kinzu handed the things in his hand to Yuin, and then he lay down on the sofa. He was really a little bit tired after flying for more than 10 hours. Eva came in with the little girl in her arms. Seeing Kinzu's lazy look, she smiled and said, "Boss, there is news from on it. They tested the blood samples of the little cow and found no problems." "Oh?" Kinzu moved his head and thought for a while before remembering what Eva was talking about. He smiled and asked, "Does she still remember this? I almost forgot it if you didn't say it." Eva rolled her eyes. She had nothing to say about her boss's thick nerves. "By the way, is the calf okay in this hurricane?" Kinzu remembered that his cow died after the checkup. "No, don't worry about this. With old John here, how could it get into trouble?" Kinzu thought about it and it was true. With old John watching, there was really nothing to worry about. The next day, Kinzu at home did not wait for Prince Hunter's call, but received a strange call instead. He looked at the number and found that it was from the United States, but Kinzu had no impression of it. It was not until he heard the familiar voice on the phone that Kinzu remembered who it was. "Mr. Chen, it turns out to be you. What's up? Do you have time now?" Chen Fudd laughed heartily on the other end of the phone, and then said, "I haven't had anything to do recently. I heard that Mr. Qin has a lot of good things, and I want to go and broaden my horizons." Kinzu was delighted to hear this, and hurriedly said, "In that case, I will wait for Mr. Chen at the ranch." After hanging up the phone, Kinzu thought of the things in his warehouse. No, he couldn't take them all out. He just wanted to understand the market, not to show off his wealth. It's not that Kinzu couldn't identify them. With his identification skills, he could identify a few pieces a day. But it's useless to identify it. Antiques are not things with clear price tags. Knowing what they are doesn't mean you know whether they are worth money. Thinking of this, Kinzu got up and went to the warehouse, nodded to the two female bodyguards guarding the door, and walked straight in. The warehouse is no longer empty as it was at the beginning. The containers are gone, replaced by rows of shelves. In the past few days, Erica and the others have not been idle. According to Kinzu's instructions, they have already classified these things. On the shelves, password boxes are neatly arranged, and each password box has a picture labeled on it. There are 3 containers and a total of 210 password boxes left, all arranged on the shelves. Kinzu looked at them one by one for a while, without too much hesitation, and picked a few items from each era and asked the bodyguards to move them back to the villa. After leaving the warehouse, Kinzu did not rush back, but came to the dock. Seeing Kinzu come in, Will, who was squatting on the dock smoking, smiled and stood up to greet him. "Boss, you're back." Kinzu nodded, looked around the dock and asked, "Is it repaired?" Will smiled and said, "It was completed a few days ago. After all, the dock didn't have any major damage. It just needs to be repaired." After walking around the dock, facing the slightly salty sea breeze and looking at the endless sea, Kinzu thought that there were not many fish near the coast, and asked, "Will, the hurricane is gone now. Do you think we need to put some fish fry in?" Will nodded and said helplessly, "With the hurricane, the fishery will definitely reduce production, and we will have to put fish fry in. Then how much do you think is appropriate? Any suggestions?" Kinzu turned to look at Will, hoping he could give some advice. Hearing this, Will pondered for a moment, then asked, "Boss, it depends on what you want to raise. Do you want to mainly raise cod, or do you want to raise some other more precious fish?" Kinzu did not rush to answer, but asked, "In addition to cod, what other precious fish species are suitable for breeding?" Will touched his chin, thought for a while, and said, "There are quite a lot of them, such as grouper, turbot, red bream, oil line, swallowtail star grouper, golden grouper, and red snapper." Stop. Kinzu felt dizzy after listening to this, and quickly waved his hand to interrupt this guy's introduction. He looked at Will speechlessly. "I just asked you to recommend a few varieties, is it that important?" "It's a habit, just a habit." Will smiled awkwardly, and asked quickly, "Boss, are you really going to raise those rare fish species?" Kinzu shrugged, found a place to sit on the dock, and asked, "Why, is it not possible?" "Not that it's impossible." Will pointed to the sea, "But, what if we encounter a hurricane or a tsunami again? Although hurricanes are not common in Boston, they are not absolutely impossible." Speaking of this, Kinzu was a little hesitant. He also had his own plans for wanting to raise rare fish species. But after being reminded by Will, and looking at the unfathomable sea, he was really a little entangled. "Well, thank you Brother Langsy for the 500 starting coins reward. Today is a holiday. Did everyone go out to play?" Chapter 588. Positioning of the manor. If he raised those ordinary fish species, his restaurant would definitely not be able to use them, and he would still have to sell them to those fishmongers. But Kinzu didn't want to do this from the bottom of his heart. It was true that he wanted to make money, but he really didn't want to deal with those businessmen, nor did he want to turn his manor into a cheap fishery. He was not short of money, and raising fish and cattle was also a kind of fun, but he didn't want to have to look at those people's faces. But what Will said made sense. A hurricane would basically ruin the offshore area on his side. That's not right. Kinzu thought about it and felt that he had walked into a dead end again. It was true that his fishery suffered losses this time, but he didn't lose money. When the insurance company's compensation came, he would still make money. What's the big deal about raising precious fish species? As long as he insured the fishery, wouldn't he be relieved? Thinking of this, Kinzu told Will about his idea, which made the old fisherman stunned. Yes, this is a solution. Why didn't he think of it before? In fact, it's not that the fishermen and fishery owners didn't think of it, but because if he did this, the investment would be too large. Insurance companies are not fools. The premium for this kind of insurance must be very high. Not to mention whether they can afford it. Even if they can, few fishing boat owners are willing to invest so much. It's not like there are no other fish to raise, why take this risk? In this case, I suggest that the boss raise some groupers, raise some of each type, and also turbot, red bream, oil line, swallowtail star grouper, golden grouper, all of these can be raised. Will frowned as he spoke, it was really too mixed. Kinzu thought about it carefully. If he didn't plan to sell it through the fishing company, there was no need to raise one kind of fish specifically. Mixed breeding is the kingly way. After all, it is impossible for a restaurant to sell only one kind of fish. Diversification is the kingly way. In this case, then raise some of them. Now that the target has been determined, Kinzu asked, "Will, do you know where there is a fish fry farm nearby? Let's go and see the fish fry when we have time." Will nodded first, and then said, "Boss, in addition to releasing the fish fry, we also need to release some bait. Didn't you release seaweed some time ago?" Kinzu asked with some doubts. Will smiled bitterly and said, "Boss, bait is not just seaweed, we also need other things, such as some small fish that like to eat small fish, we also need to release some small octopuses and worthless small fish." Kinzu touched his nose awkwardly, it seemed to be true, he could only sigh that not all fish are vegetarians. Before they could continue chatting, Kinzu's phone rang, picked it up and saw that it was Chen Fudd calling. Waving at Will, Kinzu answered the phone, and walked towards the villa while pointing the way for Chen Fudd. When Kinzu walked to the door, Chen Fudd's off-road vehicle just arrived. The car door opened, Chen Fud got down from the back seat, and said with a smile, "Mr. Clean, we meet again." Qin Zhu stretched out his hand and shook his, and also smiled and said, "This shows that we are destined to meet, isn't it?" As he said that, he nodded to a young girl who got down from the driver's seat. Qin Zhu had also seen this girl before, the one who received him last time. Seeing that Chen Fud took her out, it was probably her junior, right? Although he was curious, Qin Zhu did not ask much. After a few pleasantries, he walked towards the two of them into the house. As soon as they entered the gate of the villa, the young girl screamed, and quickly hid behind Chen Fud, looking at the white tiger in front of Qin Zhu timidly. Qin Zhu slapped the white tiger on the head and cursed, "Go away, don't you see I have guests here?" Then he turned around and looked at the two of them apologetically, "Sorry, I scared you too, this is my pet." Chen Fud was not scared, but asked in surprise, "Is this a jaguar?" Qin Zhu nodded. The characteristics of the jaguar were so obvious that it was not surprising to be recognized. Seeing Qin Zhu nod in acknowledgement, Chen Fud couldn't help but praise him repeatedly. He knew that the young man in front of him had only come to the United States a few months ago, so this tiger must not have been trained since childhood. In other words, Qin Zhu trained a tiger in a few months, or perhaps even less. Is he a tamer? This thought only stayed in Chen Fud's mind for a short moment, and then he threw it out of his mind. No matter if he is a tamer or not, this is not the reason why he came here this time. Qin Zhu didn't say much. After driving away the white tiger, he took the two into the villa. After sitting in the living room for a while and chatting about some family matters, Chen Fud couldn't help but ask, "Mr. Clean, I wonder where your collection is. Can I open my eyes?" Qin Zhu was thinking about how to start, and he smiled and said, "It's in the study. Let's go now." Seeing Chen Fud nodded, Qin Zhu got up and took the two to the office on the side. The originally slightly empty office now has a few more shelves. On the shelves, there are no longer those password boxes, but exquisite porcelain, some western knight swords and so on. Chen Fud looked at them one by one, nodded secretly in his heart, and saw that his guess was right. After Qin Zhu said that he had a lot of collections, Chen Fud began to suspect that this guy must have encountered a shipwreck. Otherwise, how could a young man who doesn't understand antiques have so many collections? But these are none of his business. He just wants to see if he can exchange a few good things from here. He doesn't expect to pick up bargains, but just hopes to get a few good things back. To be honest, he is running out of stock, otherwise he wouldn't come back to China so often. After just looking at it for a while, Chen Fud's eyes showed a few traces of surprise, and they were all good things. Vases from the Qianlong period, porcelain bowls from the late Ming dynasty, blue and white plates from the Yuan dynasty, and calligraphy and paintings from the Tang dynasty. Although these things are not very precious, it is no problem to sell them for several million. "Mr. Clean, your collection here is really good, such as this one." Chen Fud picked up a vase and said with a smile, "Although the Family Rose vase from the Tycoon period is not too precious, it can still be sold for $1 or $2 million US. Qin Zhu's heart moved, pretending to ask casually, "Mr. Chen, are you saying that the market price of things from the Qianlong period is only 1 or 2 million? Chen Fud shook his head and explained with a smile, "Of course not, this also needs to be divided into grades, such as official kilns and folk kilns, and for example, the color, and even the level of the craftsman, whether it is made by a celebrity, plus the current number of possessions, all of these can affect the value of antiques. Happy National Day everyone. Liu will take the train back to his hometown tomorrow morning, so he's going to sleep first." Chapter 589 Hunter arrives. Now, Qin Zhu was really dumbfounded, isn't it? So troublesome. As a novice in the antique industry, Qin Zhu always believed that as long as the age was determined and there was a reference, the approximate value could be estimated. But now after hearing what Chen Fud said, Qin Zhu felt that he was really stupid. He accompanied Chen Fud to look at the antiques in a daze, and directly rejected his purchase request. Qin Zhu sent the somewhat disappointed Chen Fud to the car. He came and went in a hurry. Qin Zhu didn't know whether Chen Fud was depressed, but he felt that he was very depressed. Do you really ask someone to come and assess the value of each piece? Don't joke, he still knows that wealth should not be exposed. A few antiques can be said to be a collection, and dozens or hundreds of antiques, people will think you are smuggling. Forget it. Anyway, we are not short of money for the time being, so let's not bother with it for now. Shaking his head with a bitter smile, Qin Zhu called Erica and ordered, "Move all the things in the warehouse to the basement, and make sure to put them in different categories." That will be my collection room. When Erica took people to do it, Kinzu breathed a sigh of relief and shook his head helplessly. It was indeed a world of difference. After waiting at the ranch for 3 days, Kinzu finally waited for Hunter and his group. There were many people coming. In addition to Hunter and the girl, there were more than a dozen big men with a fierce aura all over their bodies. "What are you doing?" Kinzu was a little puzzled, pointing at those people who were not good at first glance. Hunter shrugged and said helplessly, "I can't refuse the bodyguards sent by my family." Hearing what Hunter said, Kinzu understood in his heart. It was probably because the last time a few people acted alone, they almost got into trouble, so this time they sent so many people to protect them. However, it is a bit strange that if they're afraid that something will happen to him, why would they agree to let this guy take the risk? Before Kinzu could think about it, Hunter pulled him into the villa. Barry raised his head lazily under the porch, and when he saw that it was an acquaintance, he did not make any extra movements. However, this raise of his head scared a woman who was following Hunter. Seeing this, Hunter smiled and said, "Annie, don't be afraid. This is Kin's pet." After saying this, he seemed to remember something, slapped his head, and looked at Kinzu a little embarrassed. "Clean, I forgot to introduce, this is Annie, my sister, who had to come with me this time." Kinzu thought to himself, Hunter's sister, which means she is a princess. Princess? How many princesses are there in the whole world? Although Kinzu had a lot of thoughts in his mind, he did not show them, and smiled and said, "So this is Princess Anne, she is as beautiful as the legend says." Anne patted her chest in fear, and smiled and asked, "Clean, have you heard of me?" Kinzu's smile was a little stiff. "I have never heard of you. If Hunter hadn't introduced you, I wouldn't even know who you are." Fortunately, he reacted quickly. He was only slightly embarrassed for a moment, and immediately came back to his senses and said with a smile, "Didn't I hear your brother Hunter mention you? He almost made you into a flower." Hunter next to him scratched his head in confusion. "When did I mention Anne?" After entering the villa, Kinzu invited the two to sit in the living room, and then asked, "Hunter, I wonder why you went into the mountains this time?" Hunter moved comfortably on a sofa, shrugged his shoulders, and said helplessly, "To be honest, I went into the mountains for a purpose this time. You know, I went into the mountains from another place last time, but I don't know how I came out from this place. When I went back to tell my family, no one believed me. They said I must have remembered it wrong." "Oh? Did you really go into the mountains from the place?" Kinzu was also a little surprised when he heard this. You know, according to Hunter, the distance between the two places is dozens of kilometers. Hunter sat up straight and nodded very affirmatively. "I guarantee that we definitely went into the mountains from the place, and Ben Kaza and the others can also testify to this." But then he sighed again, but no one believed it. They all thought I took the wrong path and read the wrong sign. Kinzu scratched his head. At first glance, he thought that Hunter must have read it wrong. However, thinking about how he got so many things inexplicably, Kinzu was a little shaken in his heart. "Don't you have surveillance cameras where you went to the mountain? Why not turn it on and have a look?" Hunter shook his head and said with a frustrated face, "This is also a controversial place. The road into the mountain is a small road, and you have to pass through an abandoned ranch. There are no surveillance cameras around." "Hunter, you are talking like it's true. You obviously want to come here to play, but you have to find such a lame excuse." Annie next to her curled her lips in disdain. She obviously just found an excuse to come out to play, but she still made a serious look. Hunter rubbed his hair a little crazy, pointed at Annie, and said to Kinzu, "See, Clean, this is their attitude after listening." Although Kinzu was a little shaken in his heart, he asked back, "Isn't it?" This sentence immediately made Hunter lose his energy and spirit. He sighed and lay down on the sofa. "Alas, you guys, how can you understand the heart of a boy who has experienced a mysterious event?" Puff. Kinzu almost spit out a mouthful of tea. "Just you? Still a teenager?" Annie also looked at Hunter with disgust and muttered, "With this lame excuse of yours, you can only fool Her Majesty the Queen." They chatted for a while, and Kinzu asked, "Hunter, when are you going to went to the mountain?" Hunter shook his head. No, you should say when we are going into the mountain. This time I plan to take you with me." Kinzu had no choice but to ask again, "Okay, when are we going up the mountain?" Hunter raised the corner of his mouth and said, "Of course now." "What? Go now?" Kinzu looked at the time and asked in surprise, "Of course, going into the mountain, the sooner the better. But it's already 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Just in time, we can still camp. Kinzu was helpless. It's not that he didn't want to go, but he wasn't ready now. How could he go? He looked at Annie next to him, hoping that she could say something. Fortunately, although Annie wanted to go into the mountains, she was not so urgent. She smiled and said, "Brother, it's late today, and you have been on the bus for a long time. Take a day off first." Hunter wanted to say something else, but seeing Annie's tired face, he shrugged helplessly. "Okay, tomorrow is tomorrow, then we have a deal. We will go into the mountains early tomorrow morning. Thanks to Brother Danny for the reward of 399 book coins. I finally caught the train and went back to my hometown. Happy National Day to all book friends. Si est escuchando esta novela en un canal distinto a mundo fanfic novelas, significat lo descarga and y subir en sinisfuerzos invitamos cordialmente a visitar nuestro canal. Mundo fanfic novelas all encontrar la versión original de esta historia y podrás explorar muchas otras novelas de diversos narradores. Te esperamos para sumergirte en un mundo de novelas incredibles. Chapter 590 Bitten by a Snake. The next morning, Kinzu and his companions packed their bags and came to the edge of the grove under Eva's worried eyes. This time, Kinzu not only brought Dale and Erica with him, but also the increasingly lazy white tiger. Kinzu and his 3 companions, plus Hunter and Danny, plus 12 sturdy white bodyguards, made a total of 17 people. Looking at the grove in front of him, Kinzu swallowed his saliva and turned his head to ask, "Hunter, are you sure we want to go in from this side?" "Of course, didn't you meet me here that day?" Hunter said as a matter of course. Kinzu thought so too, so let's go. Hunter's bodyguards consciously led the way in front. Kinzu, Hunter and Danny walked in the middle. Dale, Erica and the remaining bodyguards were all carrying weapons and on guard. The white tiger walked beside Kinzu, and its huge body swayed from side to side, making Kinzu feel itchy. After some trials, Annie is no longer afraid of this big guy. On the contrary, she likes this big guy the most now. Especially the furry little ears of the white tiger. If Kinzu hadn't stalked her, she would have reached out to it. Hunter didn't have time to watch the 2 of them playing behind him. He kept directing everyone to move forward according to the route he remembered. The grove was not big. According to Hunter's command, everyone walked for more than half an hour and walked out of the grove. After leaving the grove, Kinzu was shocked to find that they had come to a continuous mountain range. Damn it. Kinzu clearly remembered that after leaving the grove, there should be flat pastures and grasslands, and then there would be mountains. He really didn't understand it now. Is there really some unknown power? Shaking his head, Kinzu said nothing, but followed Hunter and continued to walk deep into the mountains. Dale took a few quick steps and caught up with Kinzu, whispering in his ear, "Boss, the cell phone signal is gone." Kinzu was startled and took out his cell phone to check. Sure enough, it was out of service. "Hey, Hunter, do you still have a cell phone signal?" Kinzu asked Hunter loudly. Hunter took out his cell phone and looked at it, shrugged and said, "See, I said it would be like this, there is no signal at all." Annie also looked at her cell phone, but she did not agree with her brother's words and retorted, "That's not necessarily the case. Maybe there is a mineral vein nearby, so it caused a magnetic field reaction and the signal disappeared." Hunter looked back at Annie and asked with a smile, "Do you think if there is a mineral vein here, it will still exist?" Annie was stunned and opened her mouth, but she could no longer speak. "Yes, this is not a deep mountain forest, but close to the edge of the area, and even closer to Boston. If there is a mineral vein here, it would have been discovered long ago, right?" Seeing that Annie stopped talking, Hunter smiled triumphantly and took out a satellite phone from his arms and shook it. "Don't worry, I knew it would be like this, so I was prepared." After getting back on the road, Kinzu became more vigilant, and any slight movement would attract his attention. Unfortunately, after walking for a whole morning, except for encountering some beasts that didn't know how to live or die, everything else was normal and there was no discovery. Now, Hunter was a little anxious, and he went to the front to check the road himself, and took out the satellite positioning from time to time to check. Among the 3 people, only Annie's mood did not fluctuate at all. She was still following leisurely behind, looking left and right from time to time, and felt that everything was so new. "Hey, Clean, what are you thinking about?" Blinking her big eyes, Annie looked at the man who was always distracted beside her, and felt a little uncomfortable. After all, she is a beautiful princess of the British Empire. It's okay for you not to be attentive when walking beside you, but you are always distracted. Ah? What? Kinzu came back to his senses and looked at Annie in a daze, not knowing what she had just said to him. The smile on Annie's face froze for a moment. She gritted her teeth and asked again. Kinzu finally understood and smiled perfunctorily. Nothing, just thinking about the ranch. Annie was about to say something when she heard Hunter in front of her suddenly yell. Kinzu and the other person looked at each other and didn't bother to talk anymore, and ran over quickly. However, the scene in front of them shocked Kinzu and the other person. Hunter was sitting on the ground, sweating profusely and covering his thigh. The bodyguards next to him were also busy supporting him. Next to Hunter, there was a snake corpse as thick as an arm, still twisting its body slightly. "Brother, what's wrong with you? Are you okay?" Annie rushed over, holding Hunter's arm and asked worriedly. Hunter gritted his teeth, his face turned pale, and he seemed unable to speak. Seeing this, the bodyguard next to him hurriedly exclaimed, "Your Highness, the prince was just bitten by a snake. We need to call a helicopter now." When Annie heard this, her face turned pale. She quickly picked up the satellite phone from Hunter and began to dial tremblingly. Beaten by a snake? Kinzu's scalp was also numb. Although he was not afraid of snakes now, snakes would not bite him. But he was afraid before. When he saw a snake, he would walk around it. Once bitten by a snake, you'll be afraid of the road for 10 years. Now when he suddenly heard that someone was bitten by a snake, Kinzu's heart couldn't help but jump. But the current situation did not allow him to think too much. He took 2 steps forward and asked with concern, "What snake bit you? Is it poisonous?" The bodyguard captain turned his head and looked at the snake on the ground that was not yet dead. He gritted his teeth and said, "I don't know. I have never seen this kind of snake before." Following his gaze, Kinzu also cast his eyes on the snake body that was still twisting on the ground, and raised his eyebrows. The snake was about 1.5 meters long and as thick as an arm. Its head was somewhat similar to that of a king cobra, but it didn't look quite like one. The most important thing was that this snake gave Kinzu a very familiar feeling. He seemed to have seen it somewhere before. Where? Kinzu stared at the snake corpse on the ground, hoping to recall something. But after thinking for a long time, he still found nothing. While he was still thinking, Hunter's bodyguard captain had taken out tools and carefully cut Hunter's pants, revealing a blackened wound. Poisonous. A desperate cry suddenly rang out all around. "Brother, brother!" Annie was so scared that her body went limp. She couldn't hold the phone in her hand steadily and almost fell to the ground. Fortunately, Kinzu, who was next to her, was quick-witted and supported Annie, comforting her. "Don't worry, Hunter will be fine. I just got home. I'll post the manuscript first. I'll talk about it tomorrow. I'm going to take a shower and go to bed." Chapter 591. Terrifying snake venom. Although he said so, Kinzu was a little unsure. Looking at the wound, the snake was obviously quite poisonous. While he was talking, Hunter could no longer bear the severe pain. He rolled his eyes and fainted. Seeing this, the leader of Hunter's bodyguards turned pale with fear and shouted loudly, "Quick, bring the anti-snake venom serum." After all, he was a prince of a country. He still had to prepare a lot of things when going out, especially when going into the mountains. Anti-snake venom serum was definitely indispensable. Soon, the bodyguard behind him brought a bottle of anti-snake venom serum and injected it directly into Hunter's body. Seeing Hunter's complexion gradually recover, the bodyguard leader breathed a sigh of relief, stood up and looked at Anne, suggesting, "Princess, we must withdraw now." Anne nodded hurriedly and said, "I have contacted the helicopter, they are on their way, let's find a white place to wait." Then, Anne looked at Hunter with some worry and asked, "Nix, how is my brother?" The bodyguard leader named Nix shook his head and said with a very ugly face, "Although the toxins in the body of His Royal Highness have been temporarily suppressed, they have not dissipated. You need to see a doctor as soon as possible." As he was speaking, Hunter's face, which had originally returned to normal, began to turn purple again, and even turned black. "No, the toxicity has come back." Nix's tone seemed very panicked. This anti-snake venom serum was developed by the world's top medical experts. It has a restraining effect on the venom of most poisonous snakes in the world. At the very least, it will have a resistance effect, which can allow the injured to hold on until the doctor arrives. But now, before even a minute has passed, the serum is useless. "Quick, serum, inject another one." As Nix's voice fell, the second anti-snake venom serum was once again injected into Hunter's body by the bodyguards. But what disappointed and even despaired people was that after the serum injection, the situation did not improve at all, and Hunter's face was still changing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Bang! Anne could no longer hold the satellite phone in her hand, and it fell to the ground, hitting everyone's heart, just like a stone thrown into the lake, causing ripples. The silent atmosphere was broken by this sound, and everyone seemed to come back to their senses. "Quick, carry His Royal Highness, let's go over there." Nix waved his hand, called a few bodyguards, lifted Hunter and walked to the hillside on the side. "Wait a minute, don't move yet." Kinzu saw this and hurriedly shouted. Nix was furious when he heard this. He turned around and was about to scold him, but he found that the person who was talking was the guy who was traveling with His Royal Highness. He swallowed the words that were on his lips. Nix frowned, and although he was a little dissatisfied, he still asked, "Mr. Clean, what do you want?" "Let me see, I have learned some Chinese medical skills." Kinzu said, took 2 quick steps and came to Prince Hunter. Hearing Kinzu say that he knew medical skills, Nix looked a little hesitant. At his age, few people would believe that he knew medical skills. However, Kinzu would not care whether he hesitated or not. Looking at Hunter's condition, if he didn't treat him, it would be over when the venom spread to the heart. By then, let alone him, even if Hunter was alive, he would probably have no way to help. Therefore, he pushed Nix, who was in the way, away and secretly exchanged a drop of spiritual liquid while others were not paying attention. Nix was pushed away by Kinzu without noticing, and he was furious, but Kinzu was the friend of His Royal Highness, so he really didn't dare to act rashly. Thinking of this, Nix cast his eyes on Anne, hoping that the princess could stop Kinzu from making trouble. Noticing Nix's gaze, Anne hesitated for a moment, but still shook her head. No matter how good Kinzu's medical skills were, he was at least his brother's friend, and she couldn't say anything, so everything had to wait for the result. Just as Anne and Nix were getting more and more anxious, Kinzu rubbed his head and stood up in sweat. "Okay, come and take a look." "What?" Several incredible exclamations sounded at the same time. Nix turned around and collapsed back in 2 steps. The situation in front of him made this iron-blooded man who was used to big scenes stand there in a daze. Hunter's face, which had turned black and blue, returned to normal at this moment. Not only that, even the blackened wound has faded a little now, and it is obviously developing on the better side. "Oh my god, Clean, how did you do it?" Annie looked at Kinzu in disbelief. "You know, even the top anti-snake venom serum can't do anything to it." After hearing what Annie said, Nix also came back to his senses from the shock. He looked at Kinzu with complicated eyes, but didn't say anything. Kinzu didn't notice Nix's eyes, wiped the sweat from his forehead, stood up and said to Annie, "Let's go, let's take Hunter to find an open place first." After finding a few branches, the bodyguards quickly made a simple stretcher, carried Hunter and walked quickly forward. Fortunately, although the trees in this area were dense, Kinzu and his men still found an open place. As soon as the stretcher was put down, Hunter opened his eyes in a daze and asked in a hoarse voice, "What's wrong with me? Where is this place?" Hearing Hunter's voice, Annie couldn't hold back her tears anymore, and they rushed out. The whole person also fell on the stretcher, and asked with a choked voice, "Brother, are you okay?" Annie was scared to death. Hunter also came back to his senses a little at this time, touched Annie's little head, and chuckled. "Don't worry, brother is fine, it's not that easy to die. Brother, this time thanks to Mr. Clean, if it weren't for him, you would really be in danger." As she said, Annie described what happened just now to Hunter in a vivid way. After listening to Annie's story, Hunter looked at Kinzu with gratitude. "These are what I should do. I believe that as long as they have the ability, no one will stand by and watch someone die." Kinzu said a few polite and modest words. Although he still looked calm on the surface, he was very happy in his heart. This drop of spiritual liquid was worth it. The gratitude of a prince of a country is a huge harvest. "Clean, from now on, you are my Hunter's friend." After standing up with all his strength, Hunter put his arm around Kinzu's shoulders and patted him hard twice. Kinzu, without breaking away from Hunter's embrace, chuckled and said, "Hunter, we have always been friends, haven't we?" Chapter 592 The abnormality of the bodyguard. Hunter was stunned when he heard this, then he laughed twice and said, "Of course, we have always been friends, lifelong friends." As he was talking, there was a roar in the sky in the distance, and 3 black hawks came rushing over. Kinzu looked up and saw the Black Hawk helicopter in the sky, which looked like a big iron bird, giving him a very shocking feeling. He had seen this helicopter on TV before, but it was not as shocking as watching it up close. The huge cabin structure made people have no doubt about how many people it could accommodate. Moreover, this helicopter was not for civilian use, but a military-enhanced version, and it was equipped with a lot of weapons. Seeing Kinzu staring at the helicopter, Hunter couldn't help asking, "Why? Clean, do you like this helicopter?" Kinzu was stunned, then nodded and said with a smile, "Of course, who doesn't like such a great helicopter?" Hunter nodded in agreement. "Yes, this helicopter is really good." The 3 Black Hawks circled in the air for a while, and the doors of 2 of them suddenly opened. With a rope thrown down, more than a dozen fully armed soldiers quickly came to the ground. When the soldiers landed safely, an American officer in a major's uniform came to greet the few people. "Your Highness Hunter, are you okay?" The major obviously knew Hunter, and his eyes just glanced around and quickly came to Hunter. Before Hunter could speak, Annie next to him said anxiously, "My brother was bitten by a snake, you should take him to the hospital quickly." The major was shocked when he heard it. He only knew that something happened here, but he didn't expect it to be so serious. At this time, there was no need to be polite. The major took out the walkie-talkie and said a few words. Then a Black Hawk in the air landed tentatively. "Quick, get on the plane and go to the hospital first." After the major gave the order, he took the lead and walked towards the plane. The bodyguards did not neglect it either. They motioned Hunter to lie down again and carried him to the plane. Kinzu stood there for a long time until Annie urged him. He pointed at the white tiger a little embarrassedly. "Your Highness, why don't you go first? I'll just go back along the original route." Annie opened her mouth and wanted to say something, but when she looked at the huge white tiger, she couldn't say anything. Then be careful. I'll call you if there's anything." As she said that, Annie made a phone call gesture, then turned and ran towards the helicopter. With a roar, the Black Hawk took Hunter and others into the air, turned in the air, and quickly rushed to the hospital. When the helicopter went far away, Kinzu looked around. It seemed that there were only 3 of them left. Oh, no, there was an extra guy. Looking at the lazy white tiger not far away, Kinzu was so angry that his teeth were itching. If it weren't for this guy, wouldn't he have a helicopter now? While thinking about it, Dale's words made him a little dazed. "Boss, something happened just now is a little strange." "What's the matter?" Kinzu didn't react for a while. "It's about Prince Hunter being bitten by a snake just now." Dale frowned slightly. He always felt that something was wrong. "What's strange?" Kinzu looked at Dale with some curiosity. He didn't think it was a big deal. It was normal to be bitten by a snake when entering the mountains. "Boss, you have to know that Hunter is a prince of a country." Dale shrugged, his eyes were a little deep, and continued. "Can the prince's bodyguards be ordinary? His bodyguards are picked from the army. How can they not find a snake?" Kinzu was a little speechless for a while. After a long time, he said, "Maybe they are far away. Even if they find it, it's too late to rescue." Dale looked at Kinzu, smiled, and asked again, "Far away? How did they deal with it after the incident?" Kinzu scratched his head. It seemed that everyone was stunned for a while. Seeing that Kinzu figured it out, Dale sighed and said, "In that situation, as elites, they can't be stunned like ordinary people." "What do you mean?" Kinzu frowned. He realized that he seemed to have been involved in a big vortex unintentionally. "Me? I didn't say anything." Dale looked at a loss, as if she really didn't say anything just now. Kinzu couldn't help but twitch his mouth. If he couldn't beat this woman, he would have beaten her to the ground. Forget it. What's his business? Anyway, since the military has received the person, Hunter is safe. Kinzu sighed and shook his head. He would rather not have heard the news. With Bayu, Dale in front and Erica behind, the 3 of them and the tiger started to walk back along the original route. Halfway through, Kinzu thought of something and suddenly asked, "Dale, you said that the mobile phone has no signal. Is it really caused by the magnetic field nearby?" Dale kept walking and said, "You should ask a geologist about this question, not a little bodyguard." Rolling his eyes, Kinzu complained in his heart, "You still know that you are a little bodyguard, then do you know that you have to listen to the boss?" But now they're still in the barren mountains and old forests, Kinzu dare not offend this woman. If she goes on strike, it will be a problem whether he can walk out. The 3 of them walked and stopped, and even stopped halfway to cook some game to fill their stomachs. Indeed, without seasoning, the game they cooked was really just to fill their stomachs. They set out in the morning facing the rising sun, and Kinzu and the other two did not enter the ranch until the sunset had come out. We're finally home. This trip to the mountains is basically a waste of time. Kinzu sat on the fence next to the ranch, panting heavily, not paying any attention to his image as a rancher. Although Dale and Erica were also tired, they were much better than Kinzu. After all, they were professionally trained. Standing on the edge of the ranch and looking around, Dale sighed. The ranch is still good. If you stay in the mountains for a long time, you will become depressed. Kinzu nodded in admiration. It is really not something that ordinary people can bear to stay in the dense primeval forest where the sun is invisible for a period of time. After resting for a while, Kinzu forced himself to stand up, looked up at the sky, where the setting sun was still tinged with a hint of red, and said, "Let's go back early. I need to have a good rest for a few days." There'll definitely be a National Day update, but Leon has just returned to his hometown and settled down, so I'll talk about it tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Chapter 593 Old John's Advice. In the early morning, a ray of morning glow just rose. Kinzu took Bear and walked in the breeze on the vast pasture. It is now mid-December, and the temperature in Boston has dropped sharply. Although it has not snowed yet, Kinzu has already put on a thick coat. It has been several days since he entered the mountain, but there has been no news from Hunter, which has cast a shadow on Kinzu's heart. Fortunately, this morning, he finally received a call from Hunter. He has been transferred back to China and his body has recovered very well. Oh, it's really troublesome. Riding on Xiaobai, Kinzu shook his head and sighed. He wanted to remind Hunter, but he felt that he was overthinking. How could the bodyguard of a prince of a country be so easy to get into trouble? But if he didn't remind him, the situation that day was indeed not right, which was really tangled. As for the abnormality in the mountain, Kinzu selectively ignored it. He basically didn't get tangled up about things he didn't understand. "Uncle, what did you say just now?" Shirley rode her pony and followed Kinzu leisurely. She didn't hear her uncle's words clearly, so she asked again out of curiosity. Hearing the voice, Kinzu turned around. The little girl was wearing a small fashion with plaid stripes today. I remember that Eva bought it for her in Revere. Although it is not an international brand, the little girl still likes it very much. Especially with a pair of small leather shoes and a small cowboy hat, she is a modern version of a little cowboy. However, the pony under her crotch is a little weak. Although she has known the white tiger for a long time, the pony still can't help shivering when she is with it. Not to mention it, even Xiaobai feels a little uncomfortable when he is so close to the white tiger. Seeing this, Kinzu smiled and drove the white tiger aside, letting the guy stay away from him and the others, and then said, "Uncle said he would buy you new clothes later, okay?" "Really?" the little girl exclaimed in surprise. What child doesn't like new clothes? Kinzu thought about it, and he didn't have anything to do today, so he smiled and nodded and said, "Of course it's true." Turning the horse's head, Kinzu led a group of little guys behind him and walked back to the villa. When passing by the living area, Old John saw this group of people from a distance and rode his horse to catch up. "Hi, boss, good morning." Kinzu turned his head and looked at the old and strong ranch manager, and asked with a smile, "Old John, it's early in the morning, why don't you sleep a little longer and get up?" Now Old John is only responsible for management work, and Kinzu has forced him not to graze. After all, he is old, and if something really happens, it will be a trouble. Besides, the old man has worked on the ranch for decades. Even if Kinzu keeps him on the ranch for retirement, it is reasonable. "Boss, it's such a nice day, isn't it a waste to sleep?" Tightening his collar, Old John teased with a chuckle. Kinzu laughed. With this temperature, if Kinzu hadn't wanted to train Bear, he wouldn't have bothered to get up. Of course, he had to get past the little girl first. Without continuing to tease the old man, Kinzu stretched his stiff body and said, "Okay, Old John, what do you want from me?" Old John also restrained his smile and said, "Boss, we need some feed." "Feed?" Kinzu frowned slightly and said with some displeasure, "Old John, what I want here are free-range cows, but they don't need feed for fattening." No. Old John waved his hand. "Boss, the feed I'm talking about is not fattening feed, but concentrate feed for dairy cows." "Concentrate feed?" Kinzu was a little confused. "Concentrate feed is not feed?" "Yes, boss, concentrate feed." As if he understood that Kinzu didn't understand, Old John cleared his throat and explained. Concentrate feed is corn and wheat, mixed with some other grains, and ground together. It is used to supplement nutrition for dairy cows in winter. Kinzu understood now, nodded and said, "In this case, then you can go buy it. There is no need to tell me these little things." Old John laughed dryly twice. Of course, he knew that there was no need to talk about such a little thing, but didn't he have other things to do? Seeing that Kinzu was about to leave, Old John did not hesitate and said, "Boss, I think we can also plant something else." Seeing Kinzu's eyes looking over, Old John organized his words a little and said, "It's like this, boss. Our ranch is so big, it would be a bit of a waste if we plant all forage grass. We can also plant some corn or millet and soybeans." Seeing Kinzu nodded in agreement, Old John's old face suddenly bloomed with a smile. "Even if we don't keep these grains for ourselves, we can grind them into concentrate and sell them. This is another source of income, isn't it?" Kinzu pondered for a while and thought that what Old John said was indeed reasonable. His ranch was so large, and he didn't plan to raise so many cows. In this way, there would be a lot of empty pastures. For example, Kate's ranch was just acquired. The cows here would never go to the hundreds of acres. Kinzu looked up in astonishment and pointed at Old John with a wry smile. "You guy, it turns out that you have set your sights on Kate's land. I was wondering why you didn't propose this idea before." Old John didn't deny it either, and laughed twice. "Boss, the grass in Kate's ranch will not grow well. I think you must be preparing to harvest all the grass and sow new grass." Kinzu nodded in agreement. If it weren't for the lack of time, he would really replace all the pasture with new grass. Seeing Kinzu nod his head in agreement, Old John was very lucky. Fortunately, he said it early, so he hurriedly said, "Boss, that would be a waste. You see, we have enough forage here, and that place is close to the foot of the mountain, which is not suitable for grazing, but just right for growing crops." Kinzu waved his hand. After listening for a long time, he understood that Old John was staring at that place. "Okay, you decide. You can plant something on the place. Just don't make a loss for me." Old John was overjoyed when he heard that, and hurriedly assured, "Boss, don't worry, it will definitely not be a loss." "Okay, that's it. I'll go back first. You go and check the cowshed and the dairy factory. They are almost finished. Don't let me down." After that, Kinzu didn't wait for Old John to answer. He squeezed his legs and rode his horse to chase Shirley in front. Old John behind him looked at Kinzu's back, and the smile on his face never stopped. He has been used to a busy life. Now Kinzu doesn't let him herd the sheep. If he doesn't find something to do, won't he be anxious to death? Chapter 594 Live Chicken. Kinzu didn't know that Old John was just bored. He was still thinking that this old man was really good. At such an old age, he still remembered to consider the development of the ranch. When he came to the villa, Eva had already brought breakfast. Perhaps with the help of the bodyguards, the variety of breakfast was constantly updated. While eating breakfast, Kinzu smiled and said, "Eva, let's go to Revere for a while. It's been a long time since you went out." Eva nodded indifferently and agreed with a smile. "You haven't bought clothes for the little girl for a long time. Her summer clothes are not suitable for her anymore." Kinzu touched his nose. It was really not his fault. He brought winter clothes for the little girl. But he knew that in just a few months, the little girl had grown a little bigger and her winter clothes were not comfortable to wear. Thinking of this, Kinzu pinched the little girl's chubby face and said with a smile, "It seems that our little princess has really grown up." After breakfast, the four of them drove to Revere and stopped the car directly in front of a pedestrian street. Although Revere is not big, because it is close to Boston, there are many tourists from all over the world. Therefore, the planning of Revere is still very good. From shopping malls and hospitals to pedestrian streets and snack streets, it can be said that everything is available. It's just that Kinzu doesn't have a hobby of shopping, or it can be said that most men don't have a hobby of shopping. Since you have decided what to buy, just go and buy it directly. After entering the pedestrian street, Kinzu looked at them one by one, regardless of the brand and price. As long as the little girl thinks it's good to wear, he will pack it up with a wave of his hand. Originally, Eva and the other two girls thought it would take a whole morning, but Kinzu almost finished night the 15th in less than an hour. "Here, uncle, is that enough?" Shirley couldn't help swallowing her saliva as she looked at the cart full of clothes. Although she was happy, she felt that it was too much. "Oh? Is that enough?" Kinzu smacked his lips with some regret. He was enjoying spending money. When had he ever been so confident before? If he liked something, he would pack it up. If this one was suitable, he would pack it up. If that one was not bad, he would pack it up. His move a rich aura was obvious. But so what? He enjoyed spending money. Okay, since it's done, let's go. Waving his hand, Kinzu got in the car and was about to go back, but suddenly he remembered something. By the way, the family still needs some things. Let's go to the Chinese supermarket. Although he had grown vegetables on his ranch, he didn't know how to make things like tofu. And it was time to buy some seasonings. Since Kinzu had made up his mind, naturally no one would object, so the four of them went to a Chinese supermarket in Revere. Well, there is only one Chinese supermarket in Revere. The town is prosperous, but it is just a small town after all. Walking into the Chinese supermarket, the familiar furnishings and the familiar wax seal labels made Kinzu suddenly feel like he was back in his hometown supermarket. He shook his head and smiled bigly. He was not old yet, so why did he always miss home involuntarily? After walking around the supermarket, Kinzu only chose some seasonings and a few uncommon ingredients. Of course, it was not that he was unwilling to choose more, but the car was full and he had no choice but to continue shopping. When he thought it was about time, Kinzu took the things and walked to the checkout counter. It was the peak time of the supermarket at this time. There were still a few people queuing in front of the supermarket checkout counter. Kinzu looked and saw one man and 3 women, all of whom were Chinese. In front of Kinzu was an aunt in her 50s, who was fat and had a worn smile on her face. At this moment, the aunt was leaning forward and talking to a young woman in front of her. The young woman was not very old, about 27 or 28 years old, wearing a professional suit, and chatting with the aunt with relish. As for the one in front, Kinzu did not pay attention to it, because his eyes were attracted by the things in the aunt's basket. Chicken. A chicken. This is not the most important thing. The most important thing is that this chicken was obviously just killed. Are there live chickens for sale in the United States? Kinzu couldn't help but have a big question mark in his mind. He has been in the United States for so long, and he rarely eats chicken. One reason is that he didn't eat much beef before, and now that beef is widely available, he can't let it go. The other reason is that in China, chickens are always killed alive for the sake of freshness. Therefore, looking at the quick frozen chicken sold in supermarkets, Kinzu has never had much appetite. Thinking of this, Kinzu couldn't help it anymore. While the young woman was busy paying the bill, he hurried forward and said in Chinese, "Auntie, can I ask you something?" The middle-aged woman turned around and looked Kinzu up and down, then smiled and said, "Young man, do you also want to pursue your Jin? Let me tell you, there are many people chasing her now, you have to work hard." Kinzu couldn't help but have a few black lines on his head. What is going on? Just when he was about to say something, he heard a woman's coquettish voice. "Auntie Sen, what are you talking about?" Kinzu looked up and saw that the young woman who was busy paying the bill just now was looking at this side with a slightly red face. With an awkward smile, Kinzu nodded at her. "I guess this is the Jing," the aunt said. "Ha ha, okay, I won't say it. The aunt smiled and passed over what happened just now, and then smiled at Kinzu and said, "Young man, you see, it's not that the aunt doesn't introduce you." Kinzu's head was even more black. It turned out that this aunt was really kind-hearted. "Ahem, aunt, it's not that, I just want to ask you, where did you buy that chickens in this basket? Where did you buy them?" The aunt was stunned at first, then reacted and said with a smile, "You mean the live poultry market? It's not far away, just 2 blocks from here. Are there really live poultry for sale?" Kinzu confirmed again with some disbelief. The aunt was not angry, and asked with a smile, "Young man, you just came to the United States, right?" Kinzu nodded embarrassedly, "Yes, I just came here not long ago." At this time, the young woman had already paid. As she put the things on the cashier counter, she turned back and said with a smile, "The live poultry market here has been around for a long time, but maybe you just came to the United States and don't know much about it. Just walk over there and you'll be there after 2 blocks." The young woman who had already paid the bill didn't leave, and instead continued, "Yes, there is indeed a live poultry market over there. There are not only chickens, but also ducks, rabbits, pigeons, and all the usual ingredients for sale." Chapter 595 Live Poultry Market. After a conversation, Kinzu also knew the identities of the 2 people. The aunt's surname was Zhen, and she didn't say what her name was. She just said that everyone usually called her Aunt Zhen or Aunt Zhen. It is said that Aunt Zing is an old immigrant who came to the United States very early, but now she seems to have retired and has been idle at home. The surname of the young woman is not very common. It is Yoon Jing. As for what she does, Qin Zhu didn't dare to ask. He just knew that this woman was single and had a good family background. It is said that she has many suitors. Qin Zhu secretly glanced at her figure. Well, she does have the capital. Thinking about things, Qin Zhu walked out of the supermarket with his things, and found that the aunt and the young woman had not left yet. Seeing Qin Zhu coming out, the aunt came over enthusiastically and pointed the way for him. Shout, Qin, look, from here, turn over there, and walk about 50 meters over there, and you will see the live poultry market. Qin Zhu was slightly moved. Sure enough, the traditional virtues of China still exist. Auntie, thank you. I know how to go. How about you don't come back at noon? I'll treat you to a meal. Beef raised on our own ranch. The auntie looked at Qin Zhu with a smile and teased. Shout, Qin, do you want to treat me or Jin? Auntie Sing. Yoon Jin looked at Qin Zhu with a slightly red face, feeling a little embarrassed. Qin Zhu couldn't help but have a few black lines on his head. He really didn't mean that. In all conscience, he really just wanted to treat the auntie to a meal to show his kindness. Hee, Auntie Sing, you're joking. Of course, we will treat you together. After all, today is also thanks to the help of Auntie Sing and Sister Yoon. Otherwise, I really didn't know that there are live poultry for sale in the United States. The auntie laughed twice when she heard the words. Just when she was about to say something, she was interrupted by Yoon Jing. Well, Mr. Qin, forget it today, let's talk about it next time. Qin Zhu didn't want to dwell on it, so he hurriedly said, okay, next time, I will definitely treat Sister Yoon to a meal next time. Looking at the auntie being pulled away by Yoon Jin, Qin Zhu wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. This auntie was really enthusiastic. When the two walked away, Eva came over with Shirley, smiling and joking. Qin, the Chinese people so enthusiastic. Let's go over there and take a look. Qin Zhu rolled his eyes, ignored her teasing, and turned to the car. After following the auntie's instructions and turning 2 corners, the American live poultry trading market appeared in front of Qin Zhu. Just after getting off the car and before entering the market, a familiar, disgusting smell came into Qin Zhu's nose. Covering his nose, Qin Zhu was sure without looking that this place was definitely selling live poultry. This smell was simply too familiar. Walking into the market, rows of cages appeared in front of Qin Zhu, and the sounds of chickens and ducks were heard. Qin, what are you doing here? If you want to eat chicken, don't you have chicken slaughtered in the supermarket? Eva didn't feel uncomfortable at all. As a cowboy, she was used to these flavors. However, she still didn't understand Qin Zhu's idea. Why did he have to buy chickens here? Qin Zhu smiled and didn't explain. He walked along the road separated in the market, looking at the chicken breeds here from time to time. Seeing this, Eva shrugged her shoulders, followed quickly, and introduced them to Qin Zhu. There are many varieties of chickens here. In addition to Axia's favorite 3 yellow free-range chickens, there are also red-haired hens, black-haired hens, red chickens, young chickens, and guinea fowls. Qin Zhu looked around, picked a few half-grown 3 yellow chickens, and handed them to the staff. After receiving the chickens handed over by Qin Zhu, the staff quickly tied up chickens' feet, put them on the scale to weigh them, and put them into the slaughter pool to pluck the feathers, clean them, and chop them into pieces and bag them. The whole process took only a dozen minutes, and Qin Zhu couldn't help but nod his head. It was an industrialized country, and the whole process didn't require much manpower. But, what the hell is throwing away the chicken feet? Hey, don't throw that away, help us pack it up. Qin Zhu hurriedly greeted on the side. The staff looked at Qin Zhu strangely, shrugged, and still packed up a few pairs of chicken feet. Obviously, he couldn't understand this behavior, and even had some doubts in his mind. Isn't it said that Chinese people are very generous? Why do they even want chicken feet? Qin Zhu doesn't care what he thinks. How can such delicious food be thrown away? Qin Zhu took the processed chickens back to the ranch, and he was also thinking in his heart, should he raise them himself? But before he could think about it for too long, old John came to him. Boss, when are we going to harvest the grass? Qin Zhu looked at him speechlessly. Can you not be so anxious? Old John seemed to feel that he was a little anxious. He touched his head awkwardly, rolled his eyes, and said, Boss, you see, we can just harvest this wave of hay and sell it in winter. Qin Zhu heard this and touched his chin. What old John said seemed to make sense. No matter how small the mosquito legs were, they were still meat. Okay, then when do you think we should go? Old John stood up, took the cowboy hat he had put aside, and said excitedly, "Boss, let's go now." Kinzu didn't let old John get what he wanted. He didn't even have lunch now, so how could he go to harvest hay? Well, although he was not needed for harvesting hay. After agreeing to start harvesting hay in the afternoon, old John went back reluctantly. After sending old John away, Kinzu shrugged his shoulders and looked at Eva next to him with a wry smile and said, "I find that I am not as interested in the ranch as this guy." Eva took the things in Kinzu's hand and comforted him with a smile. "Uncle John is just a little bored. Now that you don't let him go to graze, he will be bored sitting in the office." Kinzu rolled his eyes. "It seems that this is all my fault." Ignoring Eva's snickering smile, Kinzu came to the kitchen. Today he had to cook by himself. However, when Kinzu made a pot of chicken soup with great expectations, he was a little disappointed. Even with his junior chef level, the chicken soup did not feel like the one he had eaten in his hometown before. How to say it, I always felt that something was missing. Alas, it seems that it is still a problem with the ingredients. Kinzu sighed and took the chicken soup out. He also knew that although the chicken was freshly slaughtered, it was not the kind of local chicken in China after all, and it was still not good after it was cooked. It would be great if we could get some local chickens from China. Kinzu kept muttering while eating, causing Eva and Dale, who were sitting at the same table, to look at him in confusion. Chapter 596 Harvesting Grass. The golden sun was hanging high in the sky, bringing a touch of warmth to the ranch in the cold winter. Today, Kinzu was pulled up by the little girl as usual. I don't know if the little girl has taken stimulants. This day is so suitable for sleeping in. After stretching, Kinzu tightened his collar and rode on Shibai. The wind was really strong. "Uncle, didn't Grandpa John say that we were going to cut hay? Let's go and have a look, okay?" Shirley blinked her big eyes and looked at Kinzu expectantly. "Huh? How did you know?" Kinzu came back to his senses and looked at Shirley in surprise. "How did you know that we were going to cut hay today? Didn't you tell Grandpa John yesterday?" Shirley stopped the pony and scratched her head in confusion. Did she hear it wrong? "Ha, okay, so you got up so early for this." Kinzu laughed twice, turned the horse's head, and ran towards Kate's original ranch. "Uncle, wait for me." Shirley hurriedly urged her pony to catch up, but unfortunately, the pony was a pony after all. Kinzu took 5 or 6 steps to catch up with him. Kinzu had no choice but to slow down and wait for the little girl to catch up. After walking and stopping, the 2 people and 2 horses brought a big tiger and slowly came to Kate's original ranch. At this moment, the ranch was very lively, and the roar of machines was endless. Except for those who stayed to guard the cattle, the rest of the cowboys gathered here. Mowers, ballers, pickup trucks, busy but not messy. "Boss, you're here." A lawnmower stopped in front of Kinzu, and old John jumped down from the driver's seat, which made Kinzu's head black. This old guy is really capable of bossing. He is not afraid of falling at such a high place. How is it? When can it be finished? Kinzu looked and saw that a small piece had been harvested. They got up early. Old John wiped his hands full of oil, took out a pack of cigarettes and handed one to Kinzu. After lighting it, he took a deep breath and said with a smile, "It's almost done. If everything goes well, it will be finished tomorrow." Kinzu nodded, looked at the grass that was growing a little sluggishly, and asked, "Old John, do you think anyone will want this grass?" "This?" Old John flicked the ash and said awkwardly, "There should be, right?" Kinzu pouted and was too lazy to talk to the old guy. He turned his head to look at Shirley next to him and asked with a smile, "Little girl, do you want to go up and take a look?" Shirley heard this and nodded her little head vigorously, her big eyes almost narrowed into a slit. Old John was also a little uncomfortable in front of Kinzu. He laughed twice, put out the cigarette, and came to the little girl. "Little princess, let's go, Grandpa John will take you to cut grass." Shirley turned her head to look at Kinzu. Seeing Kinzu nodded, she turned over and got off the horse, and followed John to the harvester next to her. Standing in the harvester cockpit, the little girl seemed very excited, looking around from time to time, as if she had discovered a new world. When the little girl stood firm, old John waved at Kinzu, started the harvester, and rode away. When the harvester went away, Kinzu breathed a sigh of relief, but the bundles of hay not far away made him a little worried. Hundreds of acres of hay, this is not a small number, and these hays are too poor, and he will definitely not use them. After thinking for a while, Kinzu took out his mobile phone and called Old York. After a moment, Kinzu put down the phone helplessly. Sure enough, he couldn't even send it out. It's not that people dislike these hays, but mainly because it's the beginning of winter, and people have already prepared what they should prepare, and it would be a waste to ask for these hays. At lunchtime, Kinzu was still a little uneasy. Seeing this, Eva couldn't help asking, "Clean, what's wrong? Is there any trouble?" Kinzu came back to his senses, quickly finished his lunch, wiped his mouth, and then told him what he was worried about. He didn't feel sorry for the grass, but he didn't want to waste it in his hands. "The most important thing is that I don't know how to deal with so much grass. I can't burn it, so where can I throw it?" Eva thought for a while and suddenly asked, "Clean, didn't Uncle John say he would buy some concentrate?" Kinzu nodded, a little confused. "I want to buy some concentrate, but what does it have to do with this?" Eva smiled when she heard it, stood up and cleaned up the things on the table, and said, "Of course, others may not need it, but the feed factory definitely needs these things." Kinzu was stunned, and then he reacted. "Yes, other ranches may not need it, but the feed factory definitely needs it." Thinking of this, Kinzu quickly stood up, picked up the key and ran outside. "Hey, Clean, where are you going?" Eva shouted from behind. "To the feed mill?" Kinzu stopped and looked at her. Eva covered her forehead. "Boss, you should ask Uncle John to contact these, he is familiar with them." Arriving at the ranch, she found Old John who was working hard on the harvester and told him her idea. "No problem, boss, I have also thought about this. Wait, I will go find him right away." After listening to Kinzu's idea, Old John patted his chest and promised. After that, without waiting for Kinzu to say anything, he handed the machine to Ryan next to him, rode on the four-wheel motorcycle next to him, and ran directly to the living area. "No way, this old guy runs really fast." Kinzu stared at everything in a daze. He always felt that the old guy was waiting for him to say this. Seeing Kinzu in a daze, Ryan next to him smiled and explained, "Boss, you don't know that Marcy from the feed factory has called him several times." "Oh?" Kinzu looked at Ryan in confusion. How did they know? Ryan shrugged, climbed up the harvester, and smiled and said, "Boss, Revere is so small, anything will spread quickly." Kinzu was a little speechless. It turned out that these foreigners were so gossipy. He thought the ranch was very closed, but it turned out that even the smallest things were known by others. After waiting at the ranch for less than an hour, Old John, who left in a hurry, hurried back. Of course, there was a fat old man with him. Yes, it was indeed a fat old man. He was about 50 years old, and his height was estimated to be no more than 1.7 meters, but his weight was definitely more than 170 kilograms. Kinzu estimated that a pregnant woman would feel ashamed of herself when she saw his belly. Although he sighed in his heart, Kinzu did not neglect it and hurried to greet him. "Boss, this is the general manager of March Feed Factory, March Kipling. Thanks to Ito Feng for the reward of 388 book coins. Thank you, book friends, and happy Mid-Autumn Festival. Si estes escuchando esta novela en un canal distinto a Mundo Fanfic Novelas, significat lo descarga and y subir en sin esfuerzos invitamos cordialmente a visitar nuestro canal. Mundo Fanfic Novelas all encontrás la versión original de esta historia y podrás explorar muchas otras novelas de diversos narradores. Te esperamos para sumergirte en un mundo de novelas increíbles. Chapter 597 Feed Factory. After hearing Old John's introduction, Kinzu politely reached out his hand and shook hands with him. Well, even if he wanted to hug, Kinzu estimated that his hand could not reach him. Marky was very enthusiastic. He held Kinzu's hand and would not let go. He kept saying all kinds of compliments. Kinzu felt that the earth would not turn without him. Ahem, Manager Marky, let's talk about business. Kinzu interrupted this guy awkwardly. If he continued to talk, the earth would not be able to accommodate him. Ha, yes, Mr. Clean, let's talk about business. Being interrupted by Kinzu, Marky did not react at all. His face was still full of a bright smile like a chrysanthemum, which made people want to slap him. Seeing that he did not speak, Kinzu did not hesitate and asked directly, "Manager Marky, I heard that you have concentrate for sale. I wonder how to sell it." Marky was stunned when he heard this. Didn't he come to discuss the purchase of forage? But he didn't care. After thinking for a while, he asked, "What kind of concentrate does Mr. Keen need?" Corn? Wheat? Or soybeans? Now it was Qinzyu's turn to be speechless. He really didn't know what kind to buy. He cast his eyes on old John next to him and motioned him to come over to talk. Marky, we need 10 tons of wheat concentrate, 3 tons of corn, and 1 ton of soybeans this time. You should have them in stock, right? Marky nodded and said with a smile, these things are no problem at all. If Mr. Qin needs them, I can have someone deliver them this afternoon. Don't worry about that. Qinzyu waved his hand and asked with a smile, I heard that managing Marky's feed factory has been doing well. Do you still need raw materials now? Of course, the feed factory is doing well now. I heard that Mr. Qin is going to process a batch of forage here, so I came to take a look. Although Marky had a smile on his face, he kept complaining in his heart. Why would I come to you if there is no shortage of raw materials? Well, since the man is in love with the concubine, there is nothing to say. Qinzyu was going to give the fodder away, so he didn't argue about the price. Soon, the two of them agreed on the price. Because of the limited time, Qinzyu didn't want to dry the hay, so he just sold the fresh hay to Marchi. As for the price, perhaps because he thought that there would be cooperation in the future, Marchi didn't cheat Qinzyu too much. 1 ton of fresh hay, $22, although not too high, but it was not bad. After all, even if it was dry hay, the price of 1 ton was only more than $130. After negotiating the price, Marchi called a few trailers directly. After the hay was bundled, it was directly loaded and transported away. Qinzyu just looked at it for a while, and then he was not interested in watching it anymore. He waved his hand, said goodbye to the two, and went back to the villa. The construction of the cattle pen has entered the final stage, and the sprinkler equipment has been completely updated. Because the pipelines have been laid, the progress this time is much faster than at the beginning. So when Qinzyu returned to the villa, he found that Once was already waiting here. Hi, Mr. Qin, long time no see. Seeing Qinzyu coming back, Once greeted him eagerly. Qinzyu touched his nose. Seeing this guy smiling so happily, he knew that something bad was going to happen. Sure enough, as soon as he sat down on the sofa, Once rubbed his hands, took a few documents from the side, and said with a wry smile, Mr. Qin, look, the project is now all over. Would you like to sign for it? Qinzyu took the documents and flicked through them casually, but his eyes drifted to Eva on the side. He had entrusted these things to this girl. Seeing Qinzyu's eyes looking at her, Eva put down the coffee and nodded gently. She has not been idle these days, and she often wanders around the construction site. She is still very satisfied with the quality of the construction. Eva felt that there was no problem with the few people, so Qinzyu did not hesitate and signed his name directly. Once the signature was signed, it meant that Qinzyu had to pay. Although it was only half, the total cost of several projects would be more than $10 million. Fortunately, he is rich and money comes easily, so he doesn't feel too bad about spending it. However, thinking about Kate, Qinzyu also thought about the other small ranches. It is estimated that after the hurricane, there will be a lot of bankrupt ranches. After sending Once away, Qinzyu just wanted to take a break, and the black silk glasses lady who had not seen her for a long time came to the door again. What's wrong? Qinzyu motioned Linyu to sit on the sofa. Looking at the dress of the woman opposite, he sighed in his heart, why is this girl not afraid of the cold? Linyu was still wearing a professional suit today. Although it looked a little thicker, she was wearing a skirt after all. Isn't she cold? Linyu didn't know what Qinzyu was thinking. Seeing this guy staring at her up and down as soon as he entered the room, she felt ashamed and annoyed, but also a little happy. Ahem, Qin, you were a big man owner now, please pay attention to your image. After 2 dry coughs, Linyu clamped her legs together, stroked her eyes with her hands, and looked directly at the peeping guy opposite with sharp eyes. Hearing the sound, Qinzyu touched his nose, turned away his eyes without changing his expression, pretending to know nothing, and asked lightly, Miss Lin, can you tell me your purpose now? Linyu raised her eyebrows, but said nothing, but said helplessly, Qin, our facilities are not repaired yet, but the river is almost full now, we need to drain the water. Drain? Qinzyu looked at her puzzledly, why don't you drain it yourself, why tell me? After a pause, Qinzyu reacted and asked in surprise, you don't want me to help you drain the water, do you? Rolling her eyes, Linyu stood up directly, and muttered as she walked out, isn't this to inform you? In case you don't know the situation at the time. Qinzyu laughed in astonishment behind him. How could he have so much free time to take care of this matter? Although he said so, when the day of drainage began, Kinzu couldn't help but wander over. More than 20 high-powered pumps were lined up along both sides of the river, with plastic pipes leading directly to the lake. More than 20 machines started up at the same time, and the deafening roar made some Angus cattle that were grazing leisurely raise their heads to see what was going on, even though they were still far away from the pasture. Seeing this, the cowboys who were grazing looked at each other helplessly and quickly drove the cattle to changed positions. Liam, in particular, looked at the place where the sound came from, shrugged helplessly, and muttered to himself, "Boss, it's really not my fault." You said it casually. Chapter 598 Tragic Little Ones. Lin Yu, what are you trying to do? Kinzu found Lin Yu, who was directing the workers to drain the water. Lin Yu looked at his masterpiece and raised his eyebrows proudly. I'm draining the water. But why do you have so many drain machines? Kinzu rubbed his ears. The noise was so loud that he almost wanted to go crazy. Of course it's fast. Lin Yu looked at Kinzu with an expression of looking at a fool, and then said with a smile, "At this speed, it can be solved in one day. At this speed, I will go crazy." Kinzu muttered helplessly, looking at this row of spectacular pumps, his teeth itched with hatred. Damn Ryan, who asked you to connect the electricity to her, and can't let people sleep? Well, in the final analysis, it was Lin Yu who disturbed his sweet dreams. Looking at the time, it's only 7 o'clock in the morning. With Kinzu's personality, how can he not be angry? But she has already done it, I can't tear it down again, right? Kinzu estimated that if he dismantled these pumps, Lin Yu would never let him go. Forget it, I'll just treat it as a day of symphony. Waving his hand, Kinzu said goodbye to Lin Yu, who was busy supervising, and walked towards the villa. After entering the villa, Shirley ran over curiously and asked, "Uncle, what is the thing that is making a noise?" Kinzu lay on the sofa, rubbed his sleepy eyes, and yawned loudly, then said, "It's your Aunt Lin Yu's stuff, let's not care about her." Oh. Shirley nodded obediently, and then looked at Kinzu expectantly. "Uncle, let's go out and play, okay?" Before Kinzu could answer, he heard Eva's voice calling for breakfast. "Look, little girl, it's not that I don't accompany you, let's go have breakfast first." Shirley pouted her lips and followed helplessly, still wondering what was making such a loud noise in her mind. After breakfast, Kinzu couldn't resist the little girl's expectant eyes, so he took her out for a walk. Seeing Kinzu go out, the two little huskies and the little tiger followed him happily. Maybe it's because they eat well, or maybe it's because they have reached the growth period. The two huskies are now growing up. I haven't noticed it for a few days, and now the huskies are as tall as Kinzu's calves. Well, the height is there, but is it really good for you to grow in circumference as well? So, the huskies who followed happily are in tragedy. Kinzu looked at the size of the huskies, rubbed the confused handsome faces of the two guys, and announced seriously, "From now on, your meals will be reduced by half." Well, it's decided happily. What? The huskies were stunned, and their handsome faces were blank for a while. They looked at each other, as if they couldn't accept this sudden blow. The big tiger and the little tiger next to him were very happy to see it. They wagged their tails around Kinzu, as if to say that this was the way it should be, and this was the best. However, Kinzu was speechless when he looked at the two wagging tails. Damn it, you are tigers. But why do you give me the illusion that I am seeing a husky? Stop wandering around, and your dinner will be halved. Well, that's it. Huh. The big tiger and the little tiger's tails, which were originally wagging happily, drooped down. They looked at each other blankly. What's going on? He raised his little paws and touched his little belly. The big tiger was so frustrated. Our brothers have standard figures, right? Master, why did you deduct my food? Kinzu didn't care about the inner thoughts of the guys. After saying that, he walked forward with the little girl who was laughing secretly. When he walked to the door, he looked at the little guys in the room with their heads drooping, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. If you don't keep up, there will be no food tonight. Ah. Several little guys let out a wail. When Kinzu walked outside the villa, he looked at the little guys following behind him, and the smile on his mouth became even more intense. Little guys, can't I cure you? Because the distance was a bit far, Kinzu thought for a while and rode the four-wheeled motorcycle out. Seeing the four-wheeled motorcycle, Daha and Xiaohe habitually came up. When Kinzu went out before, he would put them on the motorcycle. However, Kinzu, who had just made up his mind to make them slim, how could he let them come up? Good boy, follow slowly behind. Those who fall behind will have no food tonight. If you catch up, I will reward you with this." As he said, Kinzu took out a drop of spiritual liquid and threw it up and down to attract their attention. This thing is a good thing, and after Kinzu's experiment, it is particularly attractive to animals and the effect is also very good. Take the injured and sick cows in the ranch for example. John had already given up hope and let them fend for themselves. As a result, Kinzu got a few drops of spiritual liquid and mixed them into the water they usually drink, and they recovered in a few days. John was confused at the time. He had been a cowboy for so many years, when had he ever seen such a scene? Finally, he reported it to Kinzu, who couldn't persuade him and called the veterinarian directly. "You know, the fees charged by these guys are not low. Under normal circumstances, old John never asks for a veterinarian to come. But the veterinarian came, and after checking it out, he left with a weird look in his eyes. Before leaving, this guy sighed, "You're really rich. You have to do a physical examination to raise a cow." Kinzu still remembers that after hearing this, John's face was red. If he hadn't pulled him, this guy would probably go to the veterinarian to settle the account. But in this way, old John was relieved. For the recovery of these cows, he could only sigh that it was God's blessing. Shaking his head, Kinzu came back to his senses from his thoughts, looking at the eager faces of the little guys, and smiled and put the spiritual liquid away again. "Let's go, follow me, whoever gets there first gets it." Along with the roar, Kinzu's voice was also heard by the little guys. In the vast pasture, the cold wind blew past, bringing a shiver and chill. A black and white striped four-wheeled motorcycle, carrying Kinzu and the little girl, galloped in this large pasture. Considering that there were still workers there, the white tiger did not follow this time, and only a few little guys were running weakly behind. But after running for less than 2 minutes, something that made Kinzu depressed happened again. The familiar roar in his ears told him that a helicopter was coming. Looking up, in the air, 2 black behemoths were rapidly approaching the pasture. Judging from the shape, it should be a Black Hawk without a doubt. Thanks to Brother Danny for the 999 book coins reward. Happy Mid-Autumn Festival. Extra chapters for the helmsman James Y0001/2. Chapter 599 Black Hawk. Black Hawk. Damn, do you want me to be quiet for a while? Kinzu scratched his hair irritably and stopped his motorcycle, wanting to see if the 2 helicopters were coming for him. The result was obvious. Under Kinzu's gaze, 2 Black Hawk helicopters slowly landed in front of the villa. Damn, these guys are not done. Rolling his eyes, Kinzu turned the car around and drove towards the direction of the villa. Although Shirley was a little disappointed, the little girl was sensible and knew that her uncle had something to do, so she didn't say anything. After arriving at the door of the villa, she led the confused little guys into the villa. Kinzu stopped the motorcycle and looked at the 2 helicopters not far away. The door of one of the helicopters was already open, and 2 strong men in pilot uniforms jumped down from it. After the 2 came down, they said a few words, and then one of the strong men got on the Black Hawk in front, and the other walked towards Kinzu. "Hello, are you Mr. Clean?" The white strong man took off his hat and showed a simple smile. "What's going on?" Looking at the very polite strong man in front of him, Kinzu was a little confused. When did these guys become so polite? Although he was a little confused, Kinzu did not dare to neglect him and hurriedly said, "I am Kinzu. I wonder if you can help me." After the strong man confirmed Kinzu's identity, he took out a thick stack of documents from the backpack across his shoulder and handed it to him. "Mr. Clean, this is a gift from His Royal Highness the Prince. Please check it." "Hunter?" Kinzu asked tentatively. The strong man nodded and said respectfully, "Yes, His Royal Highness Hunter." After confirming the other party's identity, Kinzu became more curious. Hunter's gift to himself? What could it be? Taking the documents, Kinzu casually flipped through a few pages, and his body suddenly froze. Kinzu raised his head with difficulty, looking at the sturdy man in front of him with a simple smile, and asked stutteringly, "Black Hawk?" The sturdy man nodded honestly and pointed to the huge aircraft behind him that was shining with metallic light. "Yes, Mr. Clean, His Highness has ordered a universal version of Black Hawk for you, and it is a new one directly from the warehouse." As he said, the sturdy man looked at Kinzu and said with a smile, "Of course, if you don't like this color, I can ask them to repaint it for you." No, I like it very much." Kinzu was so excited that he couldn't speak. "Black Hawk. This is a Black Hawk. The best among helicopters, the equipment currently in service with the U.S. Special Forces. If Kinzu remembered correctly, there are 1,500 Black Hawks in service in the US military alone. You can imagine how popular it is. Of course, those bad remarks such as the Black Hawk Down can be ignored. Won't there be any problems with the procedures? After the excitement, Kinzu became a little worried again. This Black Hawk is given to me. When I fly it to the sky, I won't be shot down by someone, right? As if he had noticed Kinzu's thoughts, the white man smiled and explained, Mr. Clean, don't worry. The US military and the police have all the information on file. This Black Hawk is now completely yours. Kinzu couldn't help it when he heard it. He handed the documents to Eva and the others who heard the voice, and walked towards the behemoth. The Black Hawk helicopter, also known as the Sikorsky U-60 general-purpose helicopter, is a 4-rotor, twin-engine general-purpose helicopter designed and produced by the American Sikorsky Company for the U.S. Army in the 1970s. In the past few decades, many models and versions have been derived from the U-60 Black Hawk, which further demonstrates its nearly perfect versatility. For example, the U.S. Marine Corps transports helicopter Nighthawk, the U.S. Air Force Special Helicopter Padehawk, the Australian Armed Helicopter Fighting Hawk, and the U.S. Navy Anti-Submarine or Transports Helicopter Seahawk. In addition to the United States, more than 20 countries and regions have purchased U-60. These export models are generally called S-70 helicopters, that is, Sikorsky Company number. As of today, the Black Hawk has become one of the most produced helicopters in the world with a production volume of more than 4,500 so far, which also proves the excellence of its design. The white strong man followed Kinzu all the way, talking endlessly, obviously knowing this helicopter very well and being proud of it. Kinzu just nodded casually. What he cared about now was not the history of the Black Hawk, but whether his Black Hawk had been castrated. You know, as a military helicopter, the Black Hawk has weapons on it, and with a little modification, even heavy weapons can be installed. For example, the Armed Helicopter Fighting Hawk sold by the United States to Australia is an improved version of the Black Hawk. When he got closer, the white strong man put down the gangway, and Kinzu walked up along the gangway. After coming up, Kinzu found that he was not in the cockpit, but in the cockpit at the back. He looked into the cockpit and saw the densely packed instrument panel inside, which made him a little dizzy. Mr. Clean, the Black Hawk can carry 11 people, including the pilot and co-pilot, a total of 13 members. Seeing this, the white man smiled gently, pointed to the cockpit in front, and introduced it to Kinzu. After the white man's introduction, Kinzu finally got some understanding of his gift. The length of this Black Hawk is 19.76 meters, the rotor diameter is 1636 meters, the height is 405 meters, and the rotor area is 210 square meters. The empty weight of the whole machine is 4,819 kilograms, the maximum takeoff weight is 9,980 kilograms, and the power system uses two General Electric T700GA-701 turboshaft engines. The maximum flight speed of the Black Hawk is 357 km per hour, the practical ceiling can reach 5,790 meters, the maximum range is 2,220 kilometers, and the combat radius is 592 kilometers. Hearing this, Kinzu has become a little Spartan. He is sure that this is definitely a military Black Hawk that has not been castrated in any way. As for the following words, Kinzu couldn't hear them clearly. His mind was in a mess now. It was because of joy. The legendary being overwhelmed by joy, this was probably what happened to him. When Kinzu came to his senses, he found himself on the sofa in the living room, and opposite him were Dale and Erica, who were delighted and excited. Black Hawk, where is my Black Hawk? Kinzu stood up abruptly and looked around. Dale and Erica, who were opposite, were startled by Kinzu's sudden outburst. After hearing his question, they hurriedly said, "Boss, the Black Hawk is still parked outside." Kinzu breathed a sigh of relief after hearing this, and sat back on the sofa. It's good that it's not a dream, it's good that it's not a dream. Then he remembered something, looked up and asked, "Where are they?" Thank you to Jashushaba for the reward of 1,000 starting coins, and thank you to Tomato and Potato for the reward of 400 book coins. Thank you. Chapter 600 Test Flight. They left after giving you the things. Dale sat on the sofa, looking through the documents with Erica, and asked excitedly, "Boss, is this true? How could they sell the Black Hawk to you?" Kinzu nodded. He still couldn't believe it. Taking out his mobile phone, Kinzu thought for a while and called Hunter. The phone just rang twice, and Hunter's hearty laughter came through the microphone. "How is it, Clean? Did you receive the gift? Are you satisfied?" "Hunter, is this gift too expensive?" Kinzu smiled bitterly and shook his head. "A helicopter, now worth at least tens of millions of dollars, only these guys would give it as a gift. No, no. Clean, if you hadn't saved me, I would probably be gone now." Hunter's tone was very heavy. After a few days of treatment, he had basically recovered. But what kind of poison he was poisoned with, several top international experts didn't know. And according to their research, this snake venom is very strong. If the outbreak of the snake venom was not restrained in time, it would only take 3 minutes, and even if the gods came, they could not save him. Therefore, the group of experts were very surprised that he could survive. If he hadn't concealed it, Kinzu's place would probably be overcrowded by now. "Hunter, we're friends. Don't take it to heart if it's just a matter of convenience." Hearing this, Hunter laughed immediately. "Clean, you also said that we are friends, right?" Kinzu was stunned, and said with a wry smile, "Okay, then I will accept this gift." Hunter laughed heartily twice. "That's right, Clean, you have to know that it's just a helicopter, it's not a big deal." At this point, Hunter lowered his voice and said, "Clean, if you come to the British Empire, I can also help you install heavy weapons." Kinzu heard the words, his heart was pounding, and he could also install heavy weapons. But then he thought, he was not going to rebel, why did he need heavy weapons? Kinzu swallowed hard and said with a wry smile, "Hunter, stop joking. Why do I need heavy weapons?" Without waiting for Hunter to say anything else, Kinzu changed the subject and said, "By the way, Hunter, there is something I don't know whether I should say or not." "Oh?" Hunter was stunned and swallowed the words that were on his lips, and asked, "Clean, why are we still being polite? Just tell me what you want to say." Kinzu organized his words and asked, "Where were your bodyguards when the incident happened?" "Bodyguards?" Hunter repeated it twice in his mouth, and seemed to understand what Kinzu wanted to say. His expression seemed a little uncertain. After a long time, Hunter's somewhat low voice came slowly. "Clean, I will pay attention to this matter. Thank you for your reminder." Kinzu breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "This matter was also raised by my bodyguard. I really didn't pay much attention to it, or maybe she was overthinking it." Hunter didn't say anything else. After chatting for a few more sentences, he hung up the phone. After hanging up the phone, Hunter was dazed on the hospital bed for a while, then he picked up the phone and dialed a few mysterious numbers. The call was quickly connected. No one knew what Hunter said, but he only knew that when he hung up the phone, his face was full of ferocious smiles. Kinzu didn't know what happened here, and he was not calm yet. "Dale, you should be able to fly a plane, right?" Rubbing his hands, Kinzu looked at the two female bodyguards opposite with expectation. Dale raised her head proudly. "Boss, you asked the right person, there is no plane that I can't fly." Kinzu curled his lips, and complained about this girl's bragging in his heart. However, thinking that he would ask her to take him flying later, he didn't say much, but smiled and complimented. "That's right, our Dale is the best, so let's go out and fly for a while." Dale didn't say much after hearing this, picked up the pilot equipment sent over, put it on, and took a few people out. Uncle. Shirley had been listening for a long time, and at this time she also pulled the corner of Kinzu's clothes, looking at him pitifully. "Little girl, what's wrong with you?" Kinzu asked knowingly to tease Shirley. The little girl looked at Dale, who had already walked out, and said pitifully, "Uncle, I also want to take a plane." "Ha ha, come on, Uncle will take you to take a plane." Kinzu bent down and picked up the little girl, and walked out with a big laugh. On the lawn in front of the villa, a black behemoth with a metallic luster was parked quietly. At this moment, the door of the Black Hawk had been opened, and Dale was adjusting something in the driver's seat. Seeing Kinzu holding the little girl, Dale took off his helmet and asked with a smile, "Boss, are you going to sit in the co-pilot seat or in the back?" Kinzu thought about it, and couldn't suppress his curiosity, and said, "Then I'll sit in the co-pilot seat." Dale nodded, and Erica walked down from the co-pilot seat, helped Kinzu at the helmet, and then held the excited little girl and sat in the back seat. Kinzu rubbed his hands excitedly, grabbed the armrest, and sat directly in the co-pilot seat. Seeing Kinzu sitting down, Dale came over to help him fasten his seatbelt, and said with a smile, "Boss, sit tight, ready to take off." Holding the armrest, Kinzu nodded nervously, feeling that his heart was about to jump out of his chest. "Take a plane, or a plane that belongs to you." Well, although it's just a helicopter. But for Kinzu, who has only taken a passenger plane twice since he was a child, it is definitely a brand new experience. Just when Kinzu's heart was surging, Dale pushed with her little hand, and the powerful engine of the Black Hawk suddenly started. Kinzu only felt his body shake, and the roar in his ears made Kinzu feel a little uncomfortable even with a helmet. Before he could adapt, he felt his body lighten, and the vision in front of him began to slowly become wider. Daha and Xiaohe wagging their tails, the white tiger with a strange look in his eyes, Ween and Aya with a hint of amazement, and his own mansion worth billions, became smaller and smaller in front of Kinzu. It's flying, it's flying. Kinzu murmured excitedly. Ha, boss, how is it? It feels great, right? Dale's voice came into Kinzu's ears through the headset, and it also brought Kinzu back to his senses. Yeah, this feeling is great. Kinzu turned his head and looked at Dale, who was wearing a pilot uniform next to him, and exclaimed sincerely, I didn't expect you could really fly a plane. Dale raised the corner of her mouth proudly and said proudly, Boss, don't underestimate us. Let alone anything else, as long as it's available in the army, there are very few things that we sisters can't do. Thanks to Brother Langzi for the reward of 1,000 starting coins, thank you. Finde est captulo much as great as Pelaga hasta el final. No se olviden al like busgasms contenido exclusivo y exeo inmediato. Si escribete nuestro Patreon. Recuerda, cada like, si escribes no dona que nos anima a continuar. Gracias a todos nos vemos en el próximo video.